thing is Rick's over here. Rick, whenever are you working on the PowerPoint?
We're all here.
No, I'm Tom's business partner. Mark.
I didn't have a chance to go through the package.
It's okay, we're ready? Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a regularly scheduled meeting of the Montclair Historic Preservation Commission. It is October 24th, 2019. Notice has been given in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act by posting a copy of the notice on the first floor of this building and by sending a copy to the Montclair Times, the Star Ledger, and the Herald News. And tonight will be broadcast live on Channel 34 Montclair TV, and we're also streamed on YouTube. Roll call, Mr. Petto.
Sure. Chair Bennett?
Here.
Vice Chair Hyman is excused this evening. Mr. Greenbaum is excused this evening. Mr. Rooney?
Here.
Ms. Kane-Levy?
Here.
Mr. Reimnitz?
Here.
And Ms. Hickey?
Here.
For Mr. Connolly?
Here.
And Mr. Karasik?
Here.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham. First order of business is the approval of the draft minutes of our last meeting, which was October 10th, only 2 weeks ago, it seems. Does anyone have any changes or?
I have none.
I have two. On the first page, line 35, I propose that the wording be changed to say that the commission finds that the proposed design is compatible with other residences in the proposed Walnut Street district in building, in scale, massing, and height. So please eliminate adjacent buildings. We had a discussion about that. And Mr. Karasik clarified our adjacent, what that meant at our last meeting. Yes. And then the next one is page 2, line 38. The applicant is to maintain the existing cornice at the building, and in the event the cornice is not salvageable, it shall be replicated, not restored. So, any,
So, yeah, so just Mr. Rooney and Ms.
It's
Bennett are
just
eligible
us.
on the minutes.
so you and I, okay, we can vote.
Why don't you
I make a motion,
You make a motion, I second?
and we both are in favor, I hope.
That's right.
Okay, great. Minutes approved with the changes
Two
indicated.
changes.
Okay, next up is public comment. Do you have any public comment? Anybody would like to approach the bench? The bench. All right, next, if no public comment, we'll move on to committee reports. I don't think we'll have much in terms of reporting, as we only met 2 weeks ago. But minor applications?
We're hoping to schedule a meeting soon. I just got 2 new applications, so I have a total of 4, so I'll be reaching out to schedule one with the subcommittee shortly.
Okay, great. Revisions committee.
We have not had any activity at the revisions committee.
Okay, design review and redevelopment? Nothing. Education and outreach? Nothing. I would like to report that we have received another grant from the state, the state SHPO, to start research on another residential district, which would be the estate section. That'll be coming up in the future. So, old business. I would just like to discuss one thing, and it's not old business, it's new business. So before, but maybe it could be under committee reports. I think that being that we're coming to the end of the year, maybe what we can do is take a look back at all the projects that we've had a voice in, that we've made recommendations to on, and have Mr. Connolly go to look at these projects and see what is actually in the field. I think that would be a good wrap up to the end of the year. So it's just an additional, I don't know, thing for Mr. Connolly to look at.
I agree with that, because there's no actual review.
Right.
No.
No enforcement per se.
Do you want him specifically to do anything like report to the commission, write anything? I mean, I think you should be specific about, so he knows what he's supposed to be doing besides
Yes.
looking at everything.
Well, I think you should make a report that, on the recommendations that we have made to these projects and how they've,
So just to supplement this conversation, Mr. Connolly does complete monthly enforcement inspections of all the historic districts. So maybe perhaps just as part of his regular routine inspections of the districts, we can add some
That would be
review
great.
of existing
Mhm.
projects, since he's already doing field work for us.
Right.
So,
so I think that's just we can ask him
Mhm.
to do that when he goes out into
Sure.
the field. Okay. So moving on to new business. First up is HPC application number 2019-33, 600 Valley Road, JP Morgan Chase. This is a certificate of appropriateness. It's window replacement in the Upper Montclair Historic Business District. Hi, why don't you sit down? And
Would you folks please raise your right hands? You're both going to testify, I assume? Yeah. You're going to say something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're going to give this commission is truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And could you each state your name and your affiliation with the applicant?
Gianni Corleone of Chiesa, Shahinian, and John Tomasi, PC, attorney for the applicant.
Patrick Jones from Core States Group. I'm the lead architect on the project.
Thank you so much.
now, this subject property at 600 Valley Road was built in 1914. It is a two-story brick neoclassical building and is identified as a key structure in the Upper Montclair Historic District nomination report. We have our pictures that you submitted as part of the application, and Graham just gave us a new piece of information, which are the, what are these called?
those are the historic building permit record cards that we have.
Okay.
Previously, the building department kept notes of them on index cards.
Right.
They were relocating them, and we took them into the planning office, so we now use them kind of as an archived reference. And as indicated on the second card on the sheet, the first and second floor windows, or the larger main level windows at the bank building, were entirely replaced in 1989, October of 1989. So that was just a point of reference for the commission to use.
Right, okay, so let it be noted that these were replaced in 1989. And I'd like to put forward that since that time, we now have, in 2016, we now have historic design guidelines. So would you kindly run us through what you intend to do with the project?
I'll do an
Oh.
introduction first. Good evening. My name is Gianni Corleone of Chiesa, Shahinian.
I don't think it's on.
No, I can hear it.
Yes.
It's echoing.
We can't.
Probably have to get a little closer.
Good evening. There
There
it
we
is.
go.
My name is Gianni Corleone of Chiesa, Shahinian, and John Tomasi, PC. I am here on behalf of the applicant, JP Morgan Chase Bank, in connection with their application for a certificate of appropriateness for the replacement of 4 windows on their third floor at 600 Valley Road, Block 2601, Lot 7. As we've discussed, this building was constructed in 1914 and is noted in the Upper Montclair Historic Business District nomination report as key, which possesses distinct architectural and historical significance and acts as a landmark within the architectural matrix of the district. As we are all well aware of the township's historic design guidelines, the policy in section 3.3 provides that the original windows are to be preserved, maintained, or repaired, regardless of what's going on. But if replacement is necessary due to deterioration, the new windows must match the historic windows in size, arrangement of the panes, light, and number of panes. As you'll hear from our architect this evening, why the windows must be replaced instead of restored or preserved, and also details about the new proposed windows. And at this time, if the commission does not have any questions for me, I would like to introduce Mr. Patrick Jones of Core States Group.
Okay.
As Gianni mentioned, we're looking to replace 4 windows on the second floor of the bank. Presently, these windows are steel windows. They are rusting and rotting away, developing some holes and some cracks. We're looking to replace these windows with wood windows that match the first floor windows that were replaced back in 1989. We're looking to hopefully pick the exact window company and use the exact windows to match those windows and create a uniform look, as you can tell from the drawings that we had submitted to the board.
Okay, thank you.
Sir?
Do any of the commissioners have questions? Steve, would you like to
Well,
start?
you're not replacing it by number of panes, and, you're putting in fewer panes and fewer windows, et cetera, but it does look like that you're replicating the ones down below, which probably was like the steel windows were above. You couldn't find original windows similar to that?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
You couldn't find windows that were copied more of the original ones?
From the research that I did, in looking at steel windows, they really, nowadays, since the glass that they're using is an insulated glass, the actual profiles of the steel are larger. And in my research, I found that those profiles were actually even larger than the profiles of the sash windows that were used to replace the first floor windows.
Sure. Oh, they're even bigger than the first floor windows.
Yeah, the sash size, so the sash that's holding the glass in is actually looks to be actually a little bit larger.
Oh, okay.
Ms. Kane-Levy, do you have a question? I have a question. Why didn't you consider keeping the original windows, the ones that are currently there, and restoring them?
I'm really not sure how we would restore them since they're rusting away and they're developing cracks and holes in the frame themselves. It's just a matter of time. Once these windows start rusting, the steel windows start rusting, it's just a matter of time until the holes get bigger and larger in the windows and more of a draft comes through them and they eventually just deteriorate completely.
Well, is there a way to alleviate the rust or to deal with the rust and then put interior or exterior storm windows on it so that it would add as a barrier?
I don't. As I mentioned, I think that the rusting has got to a point where they're developing holes and cracks. So you may be able to take off the surface rust, but in certain instances, you can scrape it down and get all the rust out of it. But that's going to create a bigger problem than we already have. And I don't know of any other way to fill those gaps in the steel window than to take them out completely and replace them. And from my research, I did not find any steel that would steel windows that would match what is presently there.
Okay. Mr. Ennis, you have questions?
I was just doing a little research on Hope's windows while we're sitting here and looking at this. And Hope's does make some steel windows that have narrow profiles. So, I don't know, did you look at Hope's?
I did look at Hope's, yeah. The windows I was looking at had the larger profile and that thermal break in them. And that profile looked larger than the windows that we had specified on.
Do we have details of what you specified? I know you said Marvin, but then you said or equal on the drawings. I'm just wondering, how do we know? Is the intent just to match what's below, no matter what?
The intention is to match what's below, right? And it would be like a Marvin grade window, yes. And it would have the aluminum exterior and the wood interior.
But do you have an actual,
There's no detail.
There's no detail of it, though.
100%.
Okay.
The drawings.
They did, we submitted,
We do have some section cuts in the drawings, the set of drawings that we submitted.
us what page they're on?
I have a question for you, Graham. Would we have on file any historic photographs of the building before 1989 when the windows were changed?
Not within the department, perhaps the library. The library may have those photos.
I think that would be worth getting to look at.
Are you looking for the page?
Well, I know that we have them, and I know that we drew them. I guess I'm just not in this out.
Oh, that. This one? Or this one? Yeah, this is this section. Are you, this is not the same.
Oh, here we are, okay. Yeah, A6 has the, drawing A6 has the details that you were asking about.
Say that again, please. I can't hear you.
Drawing A6 has the details.
Okay. And which number?
Number 4, 5, and 6 on the left-hand side of the drawing.
Okay. And did you just testify that they're not the same size as the lower windows in terms of where the lights are? The panes, are they the same size? They're not. Are they the same size as the old windows or the same size as the windows on the first floor?
I know you're looking,
So-
but it looks like to me the existing windows are really casements on either side with a four-pane picture. It has a different layout than what you're proposing, right?
Yeah, so the windows that we're looking to replace, those have, they have 3 lights, they're 3 lights tall,
Right.
and the proportions are taller
Right.
than I believe the existing windows. But,
How
they
are the
don't-
existing
they're
windows?
They're a little bit smaller than the first floor windows, which, from my experience with designing, typically, as you go up, the size of the lights would get smaller.
I was just going to ask, how are those 1989 windows holding up? Are they in good condition, or they're sort of
Were they in good condition?
presently?
Presently, yeah, they are in good condition. There's a little bit of chalking on the outside, on the paint, but that's typical for that finish that's on the aluminum.
Okay, so for the record, I just mentioned that since that time that they were replaced in 2016, we've produced the design guidelines. And so for the treatment of historic steel, aluminum, bronze, and other metal windows, which you said you've read, on page, what page is that, 89, in our design
Section
guidelines?
3.3, yeah, the attorney referenced and read the section at the beginning.
Oh, okay. So, but you're testifying that these windows cannot be saved? Is that your testimony?
Yes. I'm not aware of a process to save them.
The new windows are all fixed? The new windows are all fixed? There's no
The windows,
operable
they're
part?
fixed. They're fixed
Everything's
windows.
fixed? Okay.
Yes.
So, that was a question.
Okay. So, I guess we'll open up for discussion now on our end. What do you think?
I guess I would just say, I'm looking at the photographs of the inside, and I am looking at the landmark series of Hope's windows that have profiles that are, 2 3/8 at the bottom and 1 7/8, that's all in keeping with what I see here, especially if nothing operates. If you created these windows out of Hopes and then you tried to make them inset the operating pieces, definitely it would look completely different. So I'm not convinced it can't be done with off-the-shelf steel windows.
And maintain the steel.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, that's why I asked about whether they're going to operate or not. If they're not going to operate, you can almost recreate the image of this
Right.
and not know that it didn't operate. And that'd be closer in keeping to what was there before. So that's my comment.
Okay.
There are also aluminum windows aluminum casement windows that come much closer to the historic steel windows than these wood windows with aluminum cladding. So I would investigate those.
The aluminum?
An aluminum window, an aluminum casement window with slender profiles that replicate the details of the existing steel windows.
The windows that we specified, they are aluminum on the outside.
Yeah, I'm
and
not
wood on
talking,
the
I'm
inside.
talking about aluminum windows. Also, there's a fiberglass window that will replicate a steel window. So Panorama is a company that makes them. Graham Windows is another company.
Okay.
Skyline is a
Colby
company.
makes a series where the mutton bars look like old steel puttied windows.
Mhm.
So there you go. That's a detail. So you just have to.
You don't mind the fiberglass windows?
They,
As opposed to
they're
these
not like
aluminum and
vinyl.
wood?
They're actually, they're very hard, and they look
I
like
realize
steel
it's
windows.
a cost thing as well, but I think we'd be more in keeping with to keep it looking at least somewhat like what was here before, and I think you can do it,
With the fiberglass
with
is
the
what we're saying?
fiberglass.
Fiberglass or aluminum. All aluminum, no wood.
Okay.
The wood makes the whole profile much chunkier than
Thicker,
what.
right.
Okay, so,
So I would investigate an alternate window than the one you're proposing.
okay.
What about the window
if-
pattern? Would you keep the existing?
Yeah. Matching the existing window pattern, the number of lights, the casement operation.
Okay. So we're talking a fiberglass window, an aluminum window. What if I got you like more accurate dimensions on what these windows are that we're proposing?
That would be,
That's
helpful. That's important, yeah,
And
that would be one
Compare
area.
the
what's there
existing to
now.
the proposed.
Okay.
Okay, so anybody have any other comments? And you've read what our historic consultant wrote, and Ms. Hickey's sitting in for him tonight, Mr. Connolly. Would you like to comment on what he wrote?
I agree with the commission in terms of if we could find a window with a more accurate, similar profile, I think that would be a good solution.
Okay, yeah. All right. Okay, so this would be then, this is a certificate of appropriateness. So now,
So we carry the application to the November meeting. Would that be sufficient time
Would that
for you all
be-
to?
sufficient for you to? Yes. And that's November what?
The 20, hang on one second, 21st?
21st.
Is it the 21st? Yeah, November 21st. The application will be carried to.
Okay, that's great. So this application, which, I have to find the number.
2019-33.
Okay, will be carried to November 21st, and in the meantime, you will investigate aluminum fiberglass with the more appropriate dimensions with the, matching the existing pattern that's there right now.
And you also want the dimensions of what we have drawn here
Yes,
too?
yes. Okay,
I would also encourage you to try to get an estimate to see if someone could restore the windows. I know you're saying you don't think it could be, but there are people out there that do steel window repair. So-
Okay, yeah, I'm just not aware of it. I haven't,
All
you
right.
know.
Well, do you have any resources like that?
Don't know any off the top of my head, but I know they're out there.
Yeah, so
That's-
maybe we
that's why
can
Tom recommended it.
brainstorm and come up with some names
How do we pass that information along?
through Graham.
Yeah.
We'll find it through
Through
Graham.
Graham. Okay, so maybe you can be in touch with Graham in the planning department, and he can give you some more
We've been in
guidance.
touch. And just for the benefit of the applicant, all revised or any updated materials that we'll be submitting for the November 21st proceedings will need to be received by our office by November 8th. Okay.
All right? Thank you. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Good luck.
I've lost it again.
I've lost my, here it is. Okay, next up in new business is a referral from the Board of Adjustment, application 2660, 60 South Fullerton Avenue, the United Way of Northern New Jersey.
There's a name.
Sure, that's great.
Gentlemen, when you get seated, we'll swear you in.
No, we don't have any pictures. This is a use variance relief and site plan approval for conversion of the basement to social services use, the rehabilitation of building, and improvements to driveway and parking area. The social services building is an individual landmark, which was landmarked by our commission in 2016. I can't find it.
Okay, hey, Paul, wait once I get sworn in, okay? Would you folks raise your right hand, please? You don't have to stand up. You can do you solemnly swear the testimony you're going to give this commission is the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth? Okay, now each of you could just, your name and identify yourself with your relation to the applicant.
Paul Sions, architect. Jackson Bangs, architect.
I'm Mark Lindley. I'm the authorized representative for the applicant.
My name is Jay Cardinal. I'm the building preservation consultant for the project.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And just to note that the materials we received are a bit light on images, so we don't, I hope, Paul, you're going to show us pictures. Okay. Oh, this is what. So I just wanted to, for some information, the Social Services Building at 60 South Fullerton Avenue was designed for the DeVilla Mills Foundation by architect William Orrin Bartlett and opened in 1951. The DeVilla Mills Foundation deeded the property to the community chest of Montclair to house social service agencies in the township. In addition, the Avis Campbell Memorial Gardens to the rear of the building were designed by Montclair resident and landscape designer Miss Avis Campbell. The garden was completed in 1952 and was featured in the Maida Babson Adams American Garden Collection in 1960. The collection is now part of the Smithsonian Institute Archives of American Gardens. The Social Services Building was built in 1952 by the DeVilla Mills Foundation and deeded to the community chest of Montclair. And that's from our local nomination report from 2016.
So we have one exhibit that we'll pass around.
Oh, I thought that was all one exhibit. Is there enough for me?
Okay, thanks. Is this your PowerPoint?
Yes, so this is a paper copy of the PowerPoint.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for hearing our application tonight. We greatly appreciate your attention to it. My name is Mark Munley. I work for an institution called New Jersey Community Capital. We are a community development financial institution. We're chartered by the U.S. Treasury. We've been in business for 31 years, and essentially we finance the nonprofit sector here in the state of New Jersey. If you'd like to know more about New Jersey Community Capital, please go to our website, newjerseycommunitycapital.org. By way of my background, I want you to know that I'm a licensed professional planner. I've been involved myself with historic preservation over very many years, including the creation of the 3 downtown Jersey City historic districts, which I was able to do with Henry Russell Hitchcock, which some of you may know, back in the late 1970s, as well as the creation and rehab of various historic structures, some of which were National Register properties. We have a dual purpose here tonight with the involvement with the Mills Memorial Social Service Building. Our intention is to maintain the social service mission of the building, as well as historically preserve the existing building and grounds while improving upon the 67-year-old structure in order to bring it into the 21st century for social service tenants. Just quickly to highlight some of the major exterior aspects of the proposal that you'll see tonight. We intend to historically repair the deteriorated facade. We intend to have an exact window replacement of what is there. We hope to and will significantly upgrade the parking and parking lot access, particularly ingress and egress. If some of you have been in and out of the public library, you know what a challenge it is sometimes. We will improve the lighting and the landscaping. We've worked with the garden club who is attending in the building and will hopefully remain. Our intention is to really create an entrance to that garden from the parking lot side, as you'll see in a couple of minutes. And we've worked with the garden club to try to extend as best we can the garden and the garden club's involvement into what will be in the parking lot area by way of the landscaping plan. In terms of the interior aspects, I just really want to point out that we are attempting to maintain all of the existing tenants. The United Way will remain as a tenant in the building. We've also been engaged with the Township of Montclair to provide senior citizens affairs programming on the first floor. Given my brief overview, I will obviously turn it over to Paul. I hope you like our design approach, and we look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll go through the PowerPoint slides, and then we'll have Jay Cardinal, who's our historic preservation expert. We'll get into more detail about the repairs. Kathleen explained pretty well what's in the nomination report, and we'll touch on that also. But basically, the first slide shows that the United Way is on the west side of South Fullerton Avenue. It's located between Union Street and Plymouth Street, and it's diagonally across the street from Roosevelt Place, and that's Teddy Roosevelt, not the other Roosevelt, Franklin. As Mark said, that the application is to renovate the existing building, bring it into the 21st century while continuing to use it as a social services building that supports the community. And also, our goal is to not only improve the building, but to improve the site, including the parking area, the landscaping, the storm drainage, and also site lighting. The second slide is the property survey prepared by Langen Engineering. This is a survey prepared in 2016. So as you can see, it's a pretty large property. It's 2.167 acres. It has a lot width of 193.42 feet across the front, and it has a lot depth of 485 feet. And the property is improved with the 2-story Mills Memorial Social Services building. There's a paved driveway on the north side of the lot. There's a large striped, unstriped, the stripes are actually fading or missing. or worn out, but there's a large unstriped parking area to the rear. And then between the building and the parking area is the Avis Campbell Memorial Garden. Additionally, there are the remains of 2 masonry garage structures. The next slide, slide number 3, is a original rendering of the building. This was around 1950. This is courtesy of the Davila Mills Foundation. And as Kathleen stated, the architect was William Orrin Bartlett, who was from Montclair. So the building, as Kathleen said, was constructed in 1951, and it was constructed by the Davila Mills Foundation, a philanthropic foundation that was started by David Mills, and then the foundation was named after he and his late wife. The original intent was to convert the house that was on the property. Since this was the late 1940s when they were planning this, the intent was to convert the house into veterans housing for veterans of World War II and their families, but the heirs of the property didn't give permission for that to happen. So the house was torn down, and then the Davila Mills Foundation sought approval from the Board of Adjustment. So this was not a permitted use. It was an R3, a multifamily residential zone for this property. So they had to go to the Zoning Board of Adjustment in 1950 to get approval to construct a 32,000 square foot social services building. The Board of Adjustment approved this in 1950, and then when the building was completed in 1951, the property and the building was turned over to the community chest, which eventually was turned over to the United Way, like 20 years later. The third slide are the drawings that were filed to the Board of Adjustment in 1950. And as you can see, there's not a lot of detail on the drawings, but these are the drawings that were approved for the building. Again, it was William Bartlett's office's drawings for the building. It showed 3 elevations, not even all 4 elevations. Next slide, slide number 5, was the site plan. And as you can see, it's labeled scheme number 9. So they went through 8 schemes before they came up with the final site plan, which is what is constructed today. So this drawing was dated August 27th, 1951. And as you can see, the plan indicates a large paved parking area at the rear of the lot, in addition to two dry wells at the rear of the property, shown by these two rectangles. No parking stall striping was indicated on these drawings. The 1950, an earlier plan in 1950 showed 12 garage stalls on the south side of the property where I'm pointing, on the Union Street side of the property. The foundation came back to the zoning board in 1951 with this drawing, moving the garages from the south side of the property to more of a central location to have 8 indoor garage spaces. The original intent, as stated in the nomination report and by reading the history of the property, was for there to be a garden between the building and the parking area, and the idea was that this garden would be a memorial to David Mills, who was, and his philanthropic efforts. So he also donated the land where the Mills reservation is. Next slide, number 6. Slide number 6 are photographs taken by our office of the Avis Campbell gardens in the last few months. So in 1952, a garden was constructed, but it was not the Avis Campbell Gardens. It was a public display gardens, and it was originally known as the Garden Center Gardens. Now the garden is named for Avis Campbell, who was a landscape designer and Montclair resident, and the design of the garden, as you can see in that top right photo, is based on the Wheel of Life, and it radiates out from the center where the fountain is today. And the Montclair Garden Club maintains this garden. Slide number 7 has 2 elevations. The front elevation, which is the east elevation facing South Fullerton Avenue, and then also the west or rear elevation. And as I stated before, the proposal is to renovate this building but bring it up to the 21st century. and also continue its use as a social services building that supports the community. And again, we'll talk about improving the site, such as the parking area, landscaping, lighting, and most importantly, or very important, is storm drainage. And then we'll hear about exterior restoration, such as masonry repair and cleaning, window replacement or repair, construction of a garden-level patio with new openings to the patio. Slide number 8 are 2 additional exterior facades. The copy you have of the bottom drawing is not rendered or colored, but on the slide on the screen, that the bottom or north elevation is rendered. So the exterior facade of the building consists of a combination of masonry block units with a brick veneer attached as the finished exterior. Limestone trim members are utilized at selected locations on the facades. All of the exterior window sills are limestone. Most or almost all of the rooftop parapets have metal copings at the top. Portions of the facades also have limestone copings. The east portion of the roof towards the front, which has the slate shingles, that has a gable-framed roof structure or penthouse. And on your package, it says that it contains the elevator equipment room, but it doesn't. That was a typo in this handout. On the slide, it correctly shows that the elevator equipment is in that penthouse directly to the rear of that gable. The gable contains, the gable-shaped roof at the front contains some HVAC equipment. The next slide, number 9, is what Kathleen read from before, which was the nomination report. So Graham Petto prepared this nomination report in August 2015. And we looked at this conditions assessment survey that was part of this nomination report that was prepared in July 2015 by Betsy Cecchio, who was a member of this commission, and she was also a preservation specialist. So that the areas of concern that were pointed out in the conditions assessment survey was that front portico was unsafe, masonry joints were expanding and separating at the building corners, there were rusting lintels above the windows, expanding and damaging adjacent bricks. There's a lot of brick repointing that was done inappropriately over the years. There's improper caulking of cracks in the facade. There are open cornice joints along the upper edge of the facade and the cracked cornerstone. Also, there are shrubs and trees that were planted right up against the building foundation. They're overgrown. They're damaging some of the areas of the masonry structure. The next 3 slides are damage maps that were prepared. Actually, Jackson prepared these drawings, and Jay will discuss this in more detail. But in addition to looking at Betsy's conditions assessment survey, Jackson actually physically went around the building and prepared these maps to show where the damage is and what the conditions are of the building now. As I said, Jay will get into this in more detail. And those 3 pages are slide number 10, which is the front and rear facade, slide number 11 are the 2 side elevations, and then slide number 12 refers to the rear garage structure that separates the garden from the parking area. Next, slide number 13, I'll go through floor plans. So the garden level plan is the lowest level of the building. Originally it was called the basement. It's now being called the garden level. So the entire floor level is really drab and dimly lit. Water infiltrates into the building through the window wells around the perimeter of the building. The window wells have plastic covers that are broken. And there's a large sunken boiler room from 1950 at the top left side of this drawing. In other words, at the southeast corner of this lower level, there's a boiler room from 1950 that's not necessary anymore. It has like a 15-foot tall ceiling, but it was typical of 1950 when there was a lot of mechanical equipment and they needed a sunken room to place this equipment. So our goal is to take advantage of the high ceiling in that boiler room to gain good quality social services space with a lot of natural light, with a private outdoor patio at the southwest corner of the building. As far as the rest of this garden level, the plan is to install all new finishes, new fixtures, and lighting throughout, and for the first time, create new ADA or barrier-free bathrooms at all 3 levels of the building. Slide number 14 refers to that garden level. So the top left photo is photograph showing that southwest corner of the building where we're discussing creating a sunken patio. The photograph labeled B shows old ground-mounted HVAC equipment in that southwest corner, and an exterior basement stair that led from the ground down to the lower level of the building. It also shows the old HVAC equipment and an abundance of exposed wires and cables that are no longer required. The plan is to put all new high-efficiency HVAC units in this building, but in particular mounted on the roof behind that gable-shaped roof, so they would be hidden from view. Photograph labeled C in the top right is a photograph of that existing boiler room. All of the mechanical equipment has been removed over the years except for that one boiler in that top left corner of that photograph. But there's the opportunity, we feel, to open up that space and take advantage of it and have an exciting office for social services. And the bottom right photo is labeled D, and that's an example of a clean, well-lit garden level office suite that we did at Academy Square, the former Catherine Gibbs School. This was also a very unattractive basement level, but by excavating a patio next to this space, we were able to create lots of natural light and make this an attractive space, just with simple finishes. Slide 15 is the top two photographs and the one on the bottom left are all from Catherine Gibbs, just to show what the concept is. So the idea is to gain natural light into the original dreary lower level basement space. And as I wrote, as seen or really not seen from the exterior, these are 2 different exterior patio spaces at the lower level of Academy Square. It makes it terrific interior space. It's not really visible from the exterior. We surrounded it with shrubs. And the bottom drawing on this slide is a cross-section of the garden level that we're proposing at 60 South Fullerton Avenue. There was a question in Tom Connolly's memo about the railing around this garden level patio. We look to the existing building. The only railing on the building are pipe rails that are painted with about 5 coats of paint. So 1.5-inch diameter pipe rail from 1950. We wouldn't be allowed to do that now for this garden level patio because it wouldn't protect the wouldn't meet building code. So we're proposing something a little bit more decorative as shown in that section, that cross section. The next slide, number 16, is the first floor plan, and again, the entire floor level is very dated. It shows that it's from 1950. The only words I could use is that it's currently drab and dimly lit. Not an exciting place for people who come to the social services to visit, to see. So again, the proposed are new finishes, fixtures, and lighting throughout. Again, new ADA bathrooms. And then one feature is to create a new stairwell in the center of the building from the first floor down to that garden level to get light to spill down from this upper floor down to that lower floor, and then to have indoor planting on both sides of that stairwell. The next slide, number 17, is the second floor plan, which is the upper floor. Just like the other floors, it's dated. It looks like it's from 1950 and hasn't been touched. The proposal, again, is new finishes, fixtures, lighting, new ADA bathrooms, just like the other 2 floors. A large portion of the second floor is just the upper level space of the auditorium. So there's what was a beautiful auditorium, which will remain in this building, which has a 2-story height with a vaulted ceiling. And that's shown on that bottom right photograph. Next, slide number 18, I'll start talking about the site. There is an existing parking area at the rear of the property. I showed 2 dry wells on that 1950 drawings. We had our civil engineers try to find them. There was no evidence of those being there anymore. The photographs were taken by Mark Munley this year after a rainfall, and that this is not atypical of this site where it floods in this northwest corner. So storm drainage is pretty non-existent right now. Weeds and overgrown trees surround much of the rear parking area. There's broken fencing on the perimeter of the lot. Paving and curbing is in poor condition, as you can see. And the striping, there is some striping, as you can see under the cars on the left side of the photograph, but most of it's non-existent. And as far as safety goes, there's insufficient site lighting. There's a couple of PSE&G pole-mounted light fixtures, but they don't do the site justice as far as providing a safe foot candle level. The slide number 19 refers to the parking lot and the entrance drive. So the photograph shows the entrance drive that leads from South Fullerton Avenue to the rear parking area. As you can see, the paving and curbing's in poor condition. Back in the parking area, again, the striping's not visible, insufficient site lighting. And then in this driveway in particular, you see that cars line up and park along that north side of the driveway, forcing this to become a one-way driveway. Cars have to wait to pass through one at a time, and it's pretty unsafe. Also, there's no sidewalk along the south side of this drive that leads from the parking area up to the building or up to the sidewalk and the entrance in the front of the building. The next slide, number 20, is the site plan that was prepared by civil engineers Petrie Engineering. So the goal is to completely repave this parking area and driveway, new striping for the parking lot, extensive new storm drainage system that would collect the water, actually bring it up under the driveway up to South Fullerton Avenue and over to the corner of South Fullerton and Union Street. There'll be a new brick paver separating the front driveway from the parking area. So we want to separate the driveway from the parking area and sort of incorporate more of garden elements to this parking area and the driveway. So part of it is to separate that driveway with a approximately 18-foot wide brick paver area to separate the drive from the parking. Importantly, we're creating a new trash and recycling enclosure where I'm pointing to, so it's at the bottom right or the southeast corner of the parking lot. That's a 12-foot by 22-foot trash enclosure, and we'll have drawings and details of that. Proposing a new bike rack. We were hoping to attract more people to this building, particularly for social service needs. The fencing around the perimeter of the property is broken and dilapidated, so the proposal is a 4-foot-high black vinyl coated chain link fence that surrounds the parking area on 3 sides and stops on line with the westerly edge of the garden, and also it stops at the access to the library's loading dock, which is on the north side of this driveway. We're also proposing a electric car charging station within one of the previous or former garage areas. So there are 2 garage areas where I'm pointing to that separated the parking area from the gardens. And I'll talk more about that, but the garages are used currently for both trash recycling and some parking. The next slide, number 21, is the site lighting plan, also prepared by Petrie Engineering. And the purpose of showing you this drawing is that they've designed a lighting level for site safety and also for no spillover onto the surrounding properties. The surrounding properties on 3 sides are single-family residential uses. So on Union Street, there's 3 lots with single-family houses that face Union. On Wild Place, there are 2.5 or 3 lots with single-family houses with the rear yards of those houses. And then also on Union Street, there are 3 lots with single-family houses until you get to the corner of Union and South Fullerton, which has the Summit Medical Group offices and parking lot. Next drawing slide is number 22, which is the landscape plan. So the the first thing we looked at with the landscape plan was to remove the overgrown trees and shrubs from the building foundation. If you've been by this building and look at the front of the building, there are two beautiful magnolia trees in the front lawn. Those are staying. No reason to remove those, but there's also trees that were planted in that space between the building and the front sidewalk. Should not have been planted there. It's barely enough space for shrubs. So most of the shrubs are overgrown, the trees are growing up against the building, covering the facade of the building and the windows. We're also calling for removal of overgrown, dead, and dying volunteer trees. So the predominant tree that surrounds this parking area is a Norway maple tree. Those were not planted by anybody. Those were volunteers. They grew like weeds around this property. So we've come up with a landscape plan. We're working with the Montclair Garden Club, consulting on selections and also placement of all new planting. But the goal is to have all of the new planting be native to northern New Jersey, in particular Essex County. So there's a plant schedule on the top right side of this slide, and all of those are native species selected to have interesting a variety of height, spring color, summer color, fall color, provide canopies in certain parts of the property, and also to surround the parking area with evergreen shrubs. So we're proposing a black vinyl coated chain link fence, which doesn't provide much screening, but in front of that, and between the parking area and the property line, will be the evergreen shrubs. Next slide, number 23. These are the windows. So these are the original windows that were constructed in when the building was constructed in 1951. So these are an early example of aluminum windows. These are 12 over 12 double hung single glazed windows. It's anodized aluminum. All of the glass panes are secured in place with putty. The windows are in poor condition for the most part because of their age, and they're also difficult to operate with the balances not providing sufficient support for the lower movable section. And also because the building does not have central air conditioning everywhere. It has it in a few places. There are through the window air conditioning units have been placed around the perimeter of the building on the first and second floor. And the left photograph shows an example where the window's been cut in order to install a window unit, a window air conditioning unit. The window sealant, as you can see in that photograph on the top right, it's been replaced several times, and for the most part, it's been replaced poorly. As you can see, it's thick, it's pink in color. So the patching has been done fairly poorly over the years of the sealant. Also, we tested the windows for asbestos in the caulking, and there is asbestos in the caulking around the windows. So the proposal is for an exact replacement, but one that has double glazing, one that would match the existing profile, the existing month-in pattern, and operate as a double-hung window. The next slide, number 24, refers to the garage structure. So this was 2 4-car garages that flanked a center structure. The center structure contains 2 storage rooms that's currently utilized by the garden club for storage. The structures separate the Avis Campbell garden from the rear parking area, and I remember in the 1980s the roofs were rotted on these flat-roofed garages, and probably in the late 1980s the roof structure was completely removed with the condition that the garden club utilized the brick walls, the east-facing brick walls, as a backdrop for the garden. And it's been successful for the garden club. As you can see from the bottom right slide, it's a very attractive backdrop. So it's a 10-foot high brick and masonry walls that remain separating the garden from the actual concrete slab of the former garages. And as you can see from these photographs, the northern garage, the garage on the left, has been used for trash and recycling. So the dumpsters have been placed probably for several years in this northern garage space. The right, or the southern garage, to the right of that center structure has been used for parking. So there are signs in there that said it was reserved parking historically. Next slide. Slide number 25 shows the proposal for the garage structure. So we don't want to use it for trash and recycling anymore. So the idea is that we make the garage more decorative, more part of the garden to sort of have a better transition from the garden to the parking area. So the proposal is to install wood or composite pergola at the top of the garage structures. And as you can see in the plan, the northernmost garage would become 3 barrier-free parking spaces or ADA parking spaces. And there would be a new opening in that 4-foot-high brick wall. So what's left of the northern wall of the garage is basically a 4-foot-high masonry wall at its lowest level. So we're proposing to open that wall so that someone in a wheelchair or someone who has difficulties walking or difficulties with mobility could park in these barrier-free spaces, wheel around or walk around the back of these spaces with a walker or in a wheelchair, and through this new masonry opening, so that they would not have to go out into the parking lot and into the paved parking lot, into traffic, and they would therefore stay on a sidewalk, which would take them up to the front of the building. As I said, there's never been a sidewalk leading from this parking area to the front of the building. There's a sidewalk leading through the garden currently, but not one that really gets someone to the front of the building from the rear parking area. The parking stalls on the south side of the garage structure, the northernmost of those 4 stalls would be the electric car charging station, and then the other spaces would be open to anyone in addition to the parking spaces in the parking lot. The interior walls would be repaired and painted. We haven't selected a color. The thought at this time is perhaps to paint it almost a color closer to the brick. The slide number 26. This is a proposed refuse enclosure. So since we're not going to keep the trash dumpsters in the garages anymore out in the open, we're creating a new refuse enclosure. The Township of Montclair has a requirement that refuse enclosures have to have a roof, have to have a concrete slab, and have some type of solid walls and gates. So the proposal is to have brick piers to match the brick on the building, and then to have openings between those brick piers be black vinyl coated chain link fencing, but with a black metal plate fastened to the rear of the fencing so that you don't see inside of the enclosure. The brick piers would be decorative with a stone coping and cap. The size of the enclosure, we determined that we needed space for at least 2 6-yard dumpsters, in addition to at least 5 20-gallon canisters for recycling. And this will be controlled by the owner as far as the schedule of collection and frequency of collection. If they find that this is, if this is not enough, then they can increase the frequency of collection. If they find it's too much, then they could decrease the frequency of collection. The last slide, and this is again, just to reiterate that the proposal is to renovate the building, bring it into the 21st century while continuing its use as a social services building. That's totally supportive of the community, just as it was in 1950-51. There's a real need for social services. When the building was built, it was there was space for Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts and other social agencies. So the mission's still the same now. There's family services in here, the Garden Club is in here, United Way is still in the building. And I think what I'd like to do is turn this over to Jay Cardinal, who's our preservation expert.
Okay, my role so far has been to evaluate the building conditions. This is a Neo-Georgian or colonial revival building. It's very simple in its design. It economizes a great deal on the architectural ornament. It has been It uses most of the ornament on the front facade, where there's a limestone portico, there's limestone porch, the paving is limestone, and the steps are limestone. There are selective use of coins at the top of these brick arches over the 6 central window bays, and they have on this facade only, and on the east facade, they have limestone lintels and sills, and that's not true on the other facades. They only have limestone sills. The door surround on the north elevation is done in limestone, but it's a restrained, and it has, oh, do you guys know who I am? Caroline does. She went to school with me at Columbia. I'm a building conservator. I've been restoring buildings since 1983. I started working for Frank Matero and Norman Weiss while a student at Columbia. My first building projects were Carnegie Hall and Ellis Island, and since then I've restored about a dozen museums, 25 different schools, about 500 buildings. But recently I've been doing a lot of theater restorations, both interior and exterior, high-end decorative finishes, including murals. Recently supervised the restoration of the murals in the Berkshire Theater. It's a wonderful panorama of a cyclorama of Willie Pagoni murals. So I've been around. I've worked on many, many buildings that are Neo-Georgian and Neo-Gothic, such as the Knickerbocker Club on 5th Avenue and 62nd Street, the Museum of the City of New York, which is like this, only everything that's limestone here is marble there and a lot more of it. So I'm pretty familiar with the techniques of historic preservation. So I hope that you all know who I am. I've worked on about 8 buildings in Montclair as well. The Union Congregational Church, I was hired by the building committee to be their owner's representative, and they wanted me to work very closely with their contractor. They did a beautiful job. They got a really good contractor, and they had a great supervisor there, Linda
Carey ran the job.
Linda Carey, she ran the job. She ran me ragged too. So it was. I've been in Montclair.
And the Wedgwood building?
The Wedgwood building, the Wentworth building, excuse me, the Madison building.
Wedgwood.
And that's.
So the Wedgwood, I think the second time we brought Jay in was for the Wedgwood building, which people know is where Urban Outfitters is.
Oh, yeah,
the
building was the old post office.
It's in poor condition. They had infilled, the windows were all infilled, and we basically convinced the owners to put the original windows back in.
Well, we found fragments built into the walls inside the building. The front facade windows were completely removed and replaced with aluminum windows.
Right.
A long time ago, but inside the building behind the partition wall was the original windows. They were cut to pieces. They weren't entirely intact, but we were able to turn them over to a window fabricator and said, replicate them exactly. And that's what we did.
And
the other thing was the contractor was struggling to figure out how to repair the terracotta, because they had no idea of how an iron spot, a faux granite salt glaze should be replicated or repaired or restored or consolidated. And so I basically walked them through step by step by step, and so brought the job in on time, pretty much on budget as well. So, and the contractors were actually happy to learn all this stuff. And we also resolved some of the issues on the roof at the same time with, I introduced Paul to some contractors who really understood how to treat a roof that had been messed around with. And they had previously installed a sprayed foam insulation over the top, and the contractor was attempting just to cover it with a recovery sheet, a capture, which, no, they had to actually take.
So we interrupted Jay just so he could give his credentials in case people did not know who he was or why he was saying what he said.
So
Thank you.
I jumped right into what the building was telling me.
Right.
And that is pretty much part and parcel of what I have done for 35 years, which is to let the building tell me what it needs. And the scope of the work here, as I understand it, is that the owner wishes to restore the building as much as possible, but because of a very limited budget, to do stabilization first and foremost, to get the building to a stable position where it's no longer deteriorating. And there are some deterioration conditions that need to be addressed right away, and that is at the top of the building where there are openings in the limestone joints. They've addressed that in the recent past by putting in new inboard flashings and coping covers over the parapet walls, these metal copings, and that has pretty much stopped the infiltration of moisture into the walls. The bricks are typical of 1950, and the mortar joints, the original untouched mortar joints, are typical of that period. They're Portland cement mortars. They don't have a voluntary admixture of lime to them, so they tend to be kind of hard, but the bricks are also fairly high fired, so they aren't a fragile colonial brick. They aren't 19th century, early 19th century brick with a low fire and a high porosity. They're pretty, they're porous bricks. They do breathe, but they are not a colonial brick. They are not a low fire brick. They're pretty high fired. So that's part of the reason why you look at the building in raking light, and if you're out there on the west elevation, right about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, you get raking light, you can actually see some shine to it. There is a little bit of vitreousness to those bricks. So they're tough, they're in good shape. The cracks that we saw through them were from what I think is expanding structural elements within. And I'll point those out a little bit later on some of the other elevations. But the bricks are in pretty good shape. Where they've been repointed or where there has been damage, it's because of walking parapets or because of water infiltration at flashings at the roof. And that's been addressed. They put in new leaders. They've corrected all of the infiltration. They put in new membrane roofing on the flat roof area. So it's actually in pretty good shape from the roof down. And what we're proposing is that you can see that big yellow stripe all the way across the bottom. And this is inappropriately pointed, and so it makes the really wide joints. And that's sort of a shame, because if somebody had told the contractor to come up with an appropriate repointing program, I think that it wouldn't be a problem now. So our intent is where it's inappropriately pointed like that, and there are several hundred square feet, maybe 1,000 square feet on the building, to only remove them and repoint them if they are damaged or defective. I know that aesthetically they don't look good, but the client needs to save as much money as possible to get in and thoroughly address some of the other problems that I'll talk about. And the other things on the brick, Paul, can you give me the next page? There are two locations where there is spalling brick and large-scale cracking. There are some cracks through the brick, but they're very small, usually no more than a foot, a few brick courses, 3 or 4 brick courses. But at the columns, on the north elevation, this column here, it's a corner column there, and there's a corner column right there. And those have vertical cracks. The cracks follow joint lines, and they also go through the face of the brick. And so I've recommended that the engineer do a probe and that they evaluate the interior conditions of the wall at that location. And that will be a first priority repair. So when we're actually doing repairs and investigations, and we're writing contract documents, we will write in that they probe these and that they evaluate the condition and that they have an allowance for doing a certain type of structural steel repair. There's probably a steel column in the back there. From the roof, there's a flat roof on top of both of those locations. In this flat roof here, there's a roof drain right in the corner. Right there, there's a roof drain right in the corner. And so that's been repaired, but we don't know where the rust is or what's causing this cracking. So we think that it's probably a water-related condition, so that would mean they have to do some sort of steel repair. expose it, then they do a scrape, prime, and paint. If that's all they need to, they'll determine how much steel is there, and they'll make a recommendation based on that. So that's going to be high on our list of things to do. The other thing that's high on my list of things to do is actually to cut back all of the trees that overhang the roof. And on the, let me see, which is it? It's the southwest corner of the building. There are some adjacent trees, one's on the opposite side of the property line, and I think that they need to have their lawyer talk about, a reasonable trimming of that tree canopy so it doesn't overhang our roof. But the other thing to do is remove all of the oversized vegetation from the base of the building. Anything within 4 feet of the building that can grow over the top of the building should not be there, ever. Should never be planted in the first place. So all of that must come down.
Talk about the garages.
I'm not talking about the garage yet. I'm still on the main building. The scope of the work for the brick is basically to make crack repairs, and that can be done in a variety of different ways. We can actually cut out the bricks and replace them with new replacement bricks. And because they're a nearly contemporary brick, it's going to be possible to find matching bricks for them. And so we'll do a very thorough search to get matching bricks or bricks that are compatible to it. I'm fairly certain that we can find a matching brick for these out of contemporary stocks. So we will, when we write a specification, we'll talk about what those repairs are, what the materials will be, and we'll also back it up with a set of detailed drawings in the specification, in the drawings sections. There'll be details on how to cut them, how to repoint them. And we'll also include the 4 different types of mortar joints that I viewed on the building. There may be a few more. But there's the limestone parapet and portico. Those have a flush joint. It will have a different mortar. Then there's the brick joints that are slightly rusticated so that they are recessed, so there's a shadow line on them. That's typical of the Georgian style. Neo-Georgian style building. And then there's also, I believe that there are sealant joints that need to be very clearly drawn and specified. That was part of the problem in the parapet, the limestone parapets, is that they didn't really do the maintenance in time, and they didn't actually put in proper sealant joints. Originally, those joints would not have sealant in them. In 1950, they were right on the cusp of using sealants and caulks on masonry joints. Those would have been pointed only. However, we will come up with 3 different alternates for pointing them, for dealing with those. One is a cover, a metal cover that matches what's there, maybe selecting a different one that matches better. But one is to repack all those head joints. And that means that we'll take out all the loose or defective material. If the copings need to be reset in any way, then they will be addressed as well. But the joint should be fully raked out, fully packed tightly between the 2 stones at that coping. And then a detailed soft joint, a sealant joint at the top. I know that, Connolly and Hickey had recommended using lead joint covers. We will get an alternate price for that, but I do have a reservation about that. For one, it's very expensive. It's about 3 times the cost of a sealant joint. And they're basically an addition to a properly executed sealant joint, a salt joint. That's the basis. That's how you set the lead joint cover over the top. And the other thing that I'd like to consider right now is that it is an abatable material. It's lead. And so if any time they have to be removed, you would have to get an abatement contractor out there to remove the joint cover and then seal it. So it's something that I've been discussing with other conservators over the last 5 or 6 years. So, but anyway, adding lead to a building. Okay, so in terms of brick, there is another brick repair that's going to be taking place on every facade, and that's at the window lintels. Right now, every single lintel on the building, the steel lintels on all four facades need to have some sort of remediation. They need to be minimally scraped, primed, and painted. On a quarter of all of the ends of the lintels where they're built into the wall, there's spalling brick. On another quarter, there is spalling or eroded mortar joints. And on the rest of them, we need to pull them all back and very carefully examine to see if there's any oxide jacking. In some of the windows, so there's going to be at least three different design details for treatments of the lintels. And that is the easiest one, which is just scrape, prime, and paint of the exposed steel. And then there's going to be one where it's just removing any deteriorated mortar at the tail ends where the lintels extend into the brickwork, and maybe replacing one or two bricks that are dislocated. And the other is going to be a complete brick replacement, 3, maybe 4 courses of brick above the lintel. And those will be really shown on the drawings, and we'll also ask for unit prices for each one to evaluate in the field what's absolutely necessary. So we'll have unit prices for those. So we'll have, also to make sure that we're matching things appropriately, we'll have a minimum of 3 mortar analyses written into the specification. The contractor actually has to take mortar from locations that are acceptable to me and the architect, and they will do a standard analysis of them, and that will be for the ratio of sand, cement, and lime. They will also do a sieve analysis and a sort and a petrographic analysis of the aggregate that comes out so that we can get an exact match of that, so that we get as close as possible to 100% match. We'll also specify exactly showing full-scale sections of the joints, how they're to be profiled, what those dimensions are. Okay. On the garage, we will be asking about the same thing. However, the garage is a different sort of construction. It's basically a cement CMU, concrete masonry unit core, and then a veneer of brick. And the brick it appears to be the same brick as in the main building. That needs a considerable amount of repointing. I'd say almost 100% repointing. And those need to be cut back. There may be some areas where there are cracks that go through the wall that need to be pinned and anchored in place, and we will have details. They'll probably be using stainless steel pins set in epoxy and then buried in mortar. All right. On the exterior, on the parapet in that location, I would not recommend soft joint. I would recommend that they lift all of the coping stones, number them, and then install a through-wall flashing, because it's a freestanding wall and it has exposure both inside and outside. And on the inboard side, where it's now just painted concrete masonry units, I would recommend that they clean that off, scrape it down to first release, very tight, do any necessary repointing. That might be one of our other repointing campaigns and masonry analysis, mortar analysis. But I would recommend that they use a breathable masonry coating or a mineral coating like a kind paint. And that would be pretty permanent. And again, it's not an interior space anymore. The roofs and the doors have been removed from these garages. So I would recommend something that is a color that's compatible with the new brick garbage enclosure, the trash enclosure, the recycling enclosure, whatever, and the brick as well. Okay. I think I answered all of the points, the excellent points that were brought up by by Connolly and Hickey. They were talking about profiles, mortar analysis, the repointing. The type of mortar will be very carefully moderated. I believe that these buildings were originally put up with a type S or type F mortar, and so we'll conform to that, and we'll make sure that it's compatible with the brick. We might also do an absorption test on the brick, because that'll also influence what grade, what classification of mortar that we use. So those will be written in the specification. I talked about the lead joint covers. We are going to get alternate prices. And again, this is, we want to seal up the building and make it as weathertight as possible. We may not be able to do all the aesthetic things. We'll also be specifying a masonry cleaning test, and the garden walls will require more cleaning than the building. The building is not very dirty. So a very light cleaning is all that's really necessary, but we'll do a testing program. We'll have a qualified masonry contractor do the cleaning. They'll be pre-qualified. We'll be very careful about selecting a contractor. And they will give us a test program where they demonstrate their proficiency to get the building clean without producing any damage. They will be supervised in the testing by me and by the architect. On the garden walls, it'll be a little bit more, they'll have to be much more careful because you can't oversaturate that wall, because it is got a lot of openings in it. So we don't necessarily know if we want to clean it before we point it. That's something that we'll write into the specifications and put in a sequence, a construction sequence. And if that work on that garden wall is to be deferred, then we would do the most important thing first, which is to stabilize any of the cracks, repoint anything that's open, and put the through wall flashing at the top of the coping just to maintain it, stabilize it. Have you any questions?
Thank you.
I just want to continue, though, some of the points from the Connolly and Hickey memo, so we address everything.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask.
Yes.
Number,
Yeah, I'll.
Well, do you want me to back up? I've got one that I forgot to talk about. One for the masonry repairs on the limestone. We will not be emphasizing using Dutchman repairs because I did not see where we needed to actually do recarving of any decorative material. I didn't see deterioration on anything that would require putting in new stone, because I'd like to keep new stone in a decorative element like a cornice over the door or the portico. If most of this is in flat stones, then I would prefer a composite matching stone like something cathedral stone. And we will use a system that is well-known, well-used, that is specifically meant for patching limestone, such as cathedral stone. And the manufacturers of these materials, these proprietary patching materials, require that the contractors installing them, using them, do a pre-qualification test. So that will be for crack repairs, surface erosion. There are some erosion and there are some edge spalling and chipping that we would rebuild using a composite patching mortar rather than a Dutchman. I didn't see the point of using a Dutchman on anything.
okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry.
That's all
So
right.
I'll go back to the Connolly-Hickey memo, and I'll work backwards, just so that we hit all of the comments. The last one, number 13, we had indicated, we'd called for a new flagpole at the front of the property. We thought it was in poor condition. I went back and looked at a facility assessment report that was prepared in 2015 by EI Associates, and they said that the flagpole is in poor condition because its paint's peeling, thereby exposing the steel of the pole, a condition that has allowed corrosion of the pole to take place. However, they recommended that remove all of the existing paint from the pole surface down to bare metal, apply one primer coat, one coat of epoxy paint specifically formulated for application onto ferrous surfaces, and keep the flagpole. So we will keep the original flagpole. Item number 12.
Did they talk anything about the hardware like the truck and pulleys and the rope? Did they talk about replacing all of those? Because that can be done.
They did not mention that in the report.
I would write that in, and also I would look at the finial on the top to see what condition that is, whether it needs to be repolished. Sometimes they were brass plated or they were gilded, so we'll take a look at that.
Oh.
Okay.
Number 12, the
Yeah,
LED?
number 12 refers to the LED tape lighting. So that refers to the arched opening in the center structure that flank the two garage spaces. And we called for LED tape lighting on the interior side of the arch to provide a nice glow and safety for that. There is an existing light fixture. It doesn't provide enough light. We thought even if it had an LED bulb in it, it still was just not enough. So we disagree with that one.
Yeah, my feeling is that if you can't lamp an existing fixture to bring it up to code, then you actually need to add additional fixtures. And I think that the LED strip lighting is contemporary enough that people will not mistake it for historical fixture. And I think that it's a much more authentic solution to a code issue, because it does need to be illuminated properly.
Can I just
Next.
ask, the existing light fixture, is there an image of it? Will it remain? Will it be repaired and remain?
It's going to remain, but
It's going to be
refitted.
remain, and it just bears, I think the maximum wattage that you can put in it is a 100-watt bulb. So that is definitely not enough foot candles for that.
And is that light fixture in that hallway?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a ceiling fixture.
And where is
Just
the,
a little,
right, and where is the LED going? Around
On
the
the
arch?
interior side of the arch.
And the interior by
side
the
of
arch? On both sides, this arch,
So
there's a,
this side and the other side, is that the intent?
I think you could put it on both sides.
Okay. And then number 11 talked about all the exterior light fixtures. So the emphasis was getting a lighting plan to provide safety, but we could provide catalog cuts to Graham's office that you could review for what those fixtures will look like.
yes, that's what we usually do.
Yes, yeah. The next item refers to the new French doors on that sunken patio level.
Mm-hmm.
So that's referring to the transoms at the top of those French doors. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I think that they're new elements altogether, because they're a total replacement. So in terms of new intrusion, I think that they should not try and look Georgian. They should look like new material. That's the way I've always looked at any alteration to an existing historic structure, is that anything new doesn't really be falsely historical. And I think that what needs to be maintained is that they follow the fenestration pattern of the windows above, the similar materials done in a modern take, that the colors are compatible or sympathetic, and that the treatment of the newly exposed foundation wall is treated sympathetically. And that basically is like I'm recommending for the interior side of the old garage walls. It used to be interior, it's using a compatible color that, is sympathetic or in harmony with the brick, but not necessarily trying to look like brick. I mean, that's an honest intrusion, honest repair.
I talked about the guardrails. There will be guardrails around this sunken patio for safety purposes. As I said, the only railing on the exterior of the building now are rails painted black. So the goal is to have something more decorative but safer. Next has the weight of new number 8, has the weight of the new mechanical equipment been considered? The mechanical design has not been completely worked out yet. We know that there will be equipment on the roof, and we will have to determine what the weight is and can the roof support it, or does it have to spread out further? But the goal is to hide it behind that existing roof structure with the slate roofing on it. The windows, the goal is to, again, this facilities assessment report from EI said that the windows should be replaced. They are single glazed. We sat through the previous application with Chase Bank, and we hear concerns. We believe that we can find a aluminum window that looks exactly like this with the mill finished aluminum with the same profile. So that is the goal. Again, we'll provide catalog cuts or shop drawings to you for review of that. That it is an important element on the facade. I think Jay addressed everything else, the first 6 items.
Yeah, I did. I covered all of the first 6. The only, I did have some additional comments on the aluminum windows. Paul pretty much covered them, that He was intent on replicating the daylight exposure, which is the percentage of glass to the total masonry opening. They will retain that, and that he's going to retain the molding profiles and the dimensions as much as possible. So there'll be, it's very flat. And the other thing is that we will, if we upgrade the windows themselves by additional glazing and weatherizing and insulating of this metal mullion and frame, that all of that increase in thickness will go towards the interior of the building and not outward. Everything will be in the same plane as the windows are right now.
Correct.
So we won't interrupt or intrude on the masonry opening at all.
Hopefully, or
That's-
One last question. We'll also match the original paint color of the window sash, okay?
Okay, thank you, thank you. All right, so, yes, please start.
On sheet 8, of your presentation, I just have a couple of questions and comments I'll go to later. Is there a reason why the lower doors, double doors, are different sizes and they don't line up with the windows above? Is there a physical reason for that?
The door that's farthest to the right is actually sized to fit inside an existing masonry opening. There's steel doors that access the current areaway there. They're only 5 feet wide. So we wanted to provide additional doors that were 6 feet wide so that they have 2 equal leaves that comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then to make things symmetrical, it seemed to make sense to have the fourth door match the first door in width.
Is there any reason why that door to the left can't move to the left so it is symmetrical below the 4 windows above?
That's a good question. The reason relates to the floor plan, where the 4 doors open onto the sunken level of the of that floor in the old pit for the boiler, whereas that last window is at the main garden level. It's higher. So we can't shift that last door over without needing to excavate a fair bit of the basement out to lower the floor.
I guess I'm missing something. You're saying
Yeah, if you flip to sheet
That's
13, you can see it in
Yeah.
plan view. So there's a pit that's lower.
there's a column there.
That
There's a
too. Yeah.
column.
Yeah, okay.
So the doors are located within that
Okay,
lower
well, that's the
area.
answer. Okay. That was my question.
Mr. Rooney, questions?
No, I think it's very thorough.
Do you have any? I have a question. You were very thorough, and there's a lot of information that you about bricks and mortars and joints, and then that will be what you said will be on the plans, and then the person who makes the final approval will be between you and Mr. Sionis. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. And then I have a question about the chain link fence. The chain link fences aren't approved or encouraged at the Secretary of Interior standards and also in our design guidelines. So is there any consideration to, what is your rationale for suggesting a chain link fence and consideration to having an aluminum?
Certain elements of the development have additional costs.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have limited funds that need to be spent on, frankly, more important items. We do hope to serve the nonprofit community, so from the owner's point of view, where we can have functionality occur at, frankly, a lower cost, it drives some of our decisions as it did in that case. That does not occur in many other elements of what we're trying to do with the building, but in that case, that was our rationale.
Okay, so I don't, well, we'll save that for comments. So is there much of a price difference? Did you price it? Oh, okay, you did price it.
And we were able to justify that by putting the evergreen shrubs in front of it on this side of the property.
But you're powder coating it black, is that?
It's black vinyl coated.
Okay.
That's the most attractive vinyl coated chain link fence, in my opinion.
Okay, will you answer my questions about the lighting? How many original lighting fixtures are on the building that you're going to maintain?
There's very few existing fixtures.
I didn't see any when I was doing the walkthrough.
Oh,
There's a couple.
There are interior fixtures that show that they're pretty run-of-the-mill colonial revival fixtures. They are not high-end. The only other one that I saw was the ceiling fixture in the passageway between the garden and the parking lot.
but nothing on the exterior, like over the front doors?
I don't recall seeing any.
Or on either side of the front door?
There are
Hmm.
fixtures, but I didn't ascertain whether or not they were original. They did not look original.
There's a couple wall-mounted fixtures above some of the emergency exits on the north side. It wasn't immediately clear if they were functional or not. They're certainly not original to the building. The plan is to, if they function, maintain them, and if not, replace them with a simple, similar fixture.
And my other question, on page 6, the brick or the pavers that surround the fountain look as though they're lifting. Is there any, I guess you do consider that.
I've been a gardener. She knows that. That is, these were loose laid on tamp sand, not on gravel and not on a sub-base, a really thick sub-base. They are recycled brick. So they are not by any means an architectural or landscape architect's finish. They are what they are. The sidewalk that goes through that and that.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about the paths through the gardens. I'm talking about around the fountain that.
Around the fountain?
Yes.
Oh, those are the same thing. They're not original. They're just, instead of being laid edgewise, they're laid flat.
Okay. I just didn't know if there was any consideration if you're.
No, they're not laid on any sort of prepared base. The fountain is, but not the walkway, not that brick walk around it, or the radiating paths coming up. Those are not, they don't look like they were actually designed, I think.
So you're just keeping.
We aren't doing anything to them.
Okay.
In our opinion, we've attempted to work with the garden club and not have any intrusion, by and large, on the garden in any manner, shape, or form. So that's sort of oriented ourselves to
Oh,
what
that's
we've got there
commendable.
today.
Okay, that's commendable.
So that wasn't really in our scope of work to look at them.
Okay, thank you.
But I was just characterizing what I read out there is that it was like, it was a garden club.
Okay, thank you. Well, any other questions from our group? Ms.
You had the perfect answer.
Hickey, do you have any comments on the comments that he gave to Tom's memo? Any additional comments?
No, not anything additional, no.
Okay. Well, before we start our comments, I was going to ask if there's the public wants to ask any questions of our witnesses? No. Okay. So we'll start with comments then.
Wow, I thought this was a great presentation.
Oh, you have a question?
No one addressed the handicap spots as you pull into the driveway, and they're very important to people using that area. Are they going away with this new design?
Well, I think we had testimony that there will be new handicap parking spots.
I understand that. I'm wondering if they're replacing the three that are at the driveway when you pull in.
I,
Off of South Fullerton Avenue. There are now 3 handicap spots.
We have requested, if you look at those handicap spots, you will see that by and large, they're being used for the public library. They're not really used for 60 South Fullerton. So we have asked the city to consider placing those handicap spots where there'll be more where people have more accessible to the front of the public library by placing them in the street in front of the building, or if necessary, in front of our building where there is no metered parking at present. I think there's other solutions to that issue, because we need to have the width of that entrance and exit so 2 cars can go in and out. It has to be, all those cars, all those parking spots against the public library side of the site must be removed, if only for fire safety points of view. When I think that a fire truck would ever have to get in there for either the library or for our building, that scares me. So we need to have those spots removed. I think there's an alternative solution for those 2 handicap spots and even a 15-minute parking spot that is there today, and it's not in that driveway.
okay, thank you. That answer your question?
But they are going away.
Well, they're
I know
That is
they're
the
being
proposal.
replaced.
they're
The
relocating.
existing ones are being eliminated.
Oh, no.
Yes, and they're being relocated.
That's the answer. Okay.
Okay. So,
I guess I'm reduced to comments about the garbage enclosure.
We spent a lot of time on that, actually, as you can see from the...
Oh, really?
Absolutely.
It seems to me it could fit in with garage, trellis, adjacent pieces a little bit better since it's near the garden and whatever.
oh, you mean in design?
Yeah.
Design, not physically moved.
Oh, physically, I think it's got to be where it is, where they take out garbage and garbage trucks pick up and all that other stuff. But
We have gone through several different options for, believe it or not, what that looks like. And in my opinion, I thought that this was the best from an operational point of view, as well as from a look point of view. We don't want it to match what exists. It does have to be a newer element to the entire site. So that is what drove our thought process. But we'll take another look.
Those are just my comments. I mean, what's new is the trellis over that garage. That's all new too, so it's new. So
Okay.
that's it.
Mr. Rooney? Ms. Kennedy?
Comments?
Comments?
Oh, no, I think it's, I was just curious, is this a new ownership? Is that what's generating this?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
It would be a joint venture between the United Way and New Jersey Community Capital's subsidiary, Community Action Preservation Corporation.
That's wonderful. So it seems like a ambitious and excellent preservation project. I'm excited to see it happen.
And I agree, and I'm glad that you've got a real professional on the job too, which is wonderful in terms of historic preservation and our architectural crew, so thank you. I think it'll be a huge asset to the community.
We think so.
So any other comments from us? I think we have a few recommendations.
Yeah, so I counted 3 recommendations. I don't know if I
Okay.
wanted to gauge. So the first was, with respect to the design, was Mr. Remnick's comment with respect to the garbage enclosure. Was there consensus among the rest of the commission with respect to the proposed design of the garbage enclosure should be more consistent with that of the garage rehabilitation?
I agree.
Okay. And then the 2 other comments that I had, the applicant is to return to the HPC for a review of all exterior lighting fixtures and a review of the replacement windows to be used at the building. And then that the applicant is also to return to the HPC or to provide a final as-approved plan from the Board of Adjustment to the commission.
And I'd also like to add the fence, that if...
And a note about the fence.
The
Okay.
fence, that to not, if there's an alternative to the chain link, that, maybe, maybe you could squeeze a few extra dollars out of the budget. But
Yeah.
that I think is a huge, that's such, even though it will be screened by your vegetation, it's still a big part of it.
Yeah, so I think what we'll do is we'll structure the memo as we've done our kind of more recent memos. So we'll probably have two kind of finding statements of finding, which is that the commission finds that the proposed rehabilitation of the facility is consistent with Secretary of the Interior standards and will be a benefit to the community. And the second is that the use of a chain link fence is not consistent with the design guidelines. And then those three conditions, which would be a request of any approval of the board, would be those three conditions that we mentioned.
Okay.
I just wanted to bring up the point, I don't think it was quite answered, Mr. Connolly's report about these new below-grade French doors.
Oh, right.
And the transoms there. And I think his concern was maybe that the lintel was a little too close to the first floor and perhaps the visibility from
If you look
grade.
adjacent to them, towards the front of the building, you actually see 2 or 3 windows that rise above that plenum.
Okay.
And so when I first read his comment, I thought maybe he wanted us to make them bigger and go into that
No, I was
area.
thinking he meant to drop
But
it.
then I remembered that is exactly the configuration, the transom and 2 side lights, the French doors. That's what's there now. So this actually is.
So is the head of are there windows there presently?
That's exactly where the opening is.
So you're dropping.
That's the existing
But that's the lintel level already?
That's the existing
Okay.
opening. That's what we're replicating or infilling.
And the window to the left, which is at the rear of the building, is that an existing opening as well? Or are you creating a new opening?
The new window on the left.
Because that seems to be,
There's currently a much smaller window, but since they're changing the stair going down or the exposure of that wall, they are enlarging that existing window. And that was an areaway window similar to the ones to the, on the right side.
Yeah.
And they were smaller. It was a much smaller window. And since they're opening that window, the intent is to open that basement wall up for more interior light, then they match the size of the window above.
oh, okay.
And they just made a new window. Instead of a little tiny one, it's only
Right.
about this big.
Well,
They
can that
wanted
window,
closer.
if it's the same opening, just come down a little bit so that it's on the same horizontal line as the other?
Right,
Yeah.
but it's just much smaller. It's like the other ones. Those small areaway windows are in line, they're centered, but they're much smaller than the first. and
No,
second.
I understand. I'm just wondering if you could just drop.
So this.
Yes,
on
so
this
that's
slide,
not on that.
Correct. We corrected it on this slide because we saw it looked funny.
Oh,
on the-
okay.
on the
It looks-
paper.
okay.
It looks weird.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was a late update.
Yeah, so
Okay.
this has been updated on this slide, just like
Okay.
this was colored later than those were printed.
Okay. All right. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So why don't we just take a 2-minute break so that, before we go? Are you set up for the PowerPoint? Yep. All right. at 9:35, we have our presentation by Margaret Hickey from Connolly and Hickey, Historical Architects, and it's her fact findings on the Oakcroft and Wheeler Street Historic Survey. And I'm going to ask Mr. Petto to give a little background information.
Sure. So for the benefit of those members in the audience in attendance, my name is Graham Petto. I serve as secretary to the commission, but I also serve as assistant planner here for the township in the Department of Planning Community Development. In 2018, the township applied for a certified local government grant and aid from the State Historic Preservation Office. The program is funded through the National Park Service, and we were awarded just under $25,000 to complete a historic survey of these two neighborhoods. The township went through an RFP process and selected Connolly and Hickey to conduct this intensive cultural resource survey of these two neighborhoods and prepare a draft early nomination report should the findings from the consultants be favorable to proceed with a nomination as a local landmark historic district. So tonight represents the first final report out from the consultant on their work. So this is the first time that the commission and members of the public are hearing about this process. So we'll hear the recommendations from Ms. Hickey tonight on both of these areas. Moving forward, the commission will be holding a community meeting on Tuesday, November 12th at 7 p.m. At which Ms. Hickey again will be present, and any members of the commission that would like to be present. And Ms. Hickey will do her presentation again for broader members of the community of these neighborhoods to come out and hear the presentation. Both proceedings tonight and on Tuesday, November 12th will be recorded and broadcast live on TV 34. And then we will are working to set up a little bit of a web page about this districting process. We'll have links to these videos, the reports, and all other materials provided for residents to understand the process and hear all the information and see the presentations that have been made. So that's kind of a background and kind of next steps going forward. And then should the commission, should we proceed with the full nominations, we're looking to schedule a public hearing for those nominations at our December meeting of the commission. So.
And I'd just like to add that Mr. Petto has set up the website under the, well, in addition to our website for historic preservation, if you're familiar with the website, the Montclair Township website, you go into government, boards and commissions, historic preservation, and then if you click on that, it will bring up all pages, and this report will also be on
Correct.
that. Mm-hmm. And including not only this report, but also our 5 current districts, historic districts, and you can get a wealth of information, including, certificate of appropriateness, whatever else you need that concerns what we do here on the commission. So, without further ado, I'd like to thank Ms. Hickey and the work that she's done. So, can you begin?
Absolutely. So, Colin Hickey was engaged to prepare an intensive level survey for the Wheeler Street residential neighborhood and as well as the Oakcroft residential neighborhood. And the two were done simultaneously, but they are clearly different areas. So just as an example, here are 4 buildings, 2 from each survey area. So upper left-hand corner is Oakcroft, and then this also is Oakcroft in the lower right-hand corner, and upper right-hand corner is a property on Wheeler Street, and then this is an apartment building on Woodland in the Wheeler Street neighborhood. So we're looking at primarily single-family residences in Oakcroft and 2-family and apartment buildings in Wheeler with sort of different history. So I'm going to go over kind of what our role was, what we did, a summary of the findings, and what our recommendations are. So the work included really an overall history of Montclair, kind of focusing on how Montclair developed with regard to the Wheeler Street neighborhood and the Oakcroft neighborhood. And I'll go further into the findings later on. We surveyed approximately 211 properties between both areas. 97 are in the Wheeler Street neighborhood and 113 are in the Oakcroft neighborhood. This does include some properties without buildings. And then we had a determination of period of significance based on the history and development of these neighborhoods. Wheeler Street is 1910 to circa 1930, and Oakcroft is 1906 to 1946. And it's interesting that both areas developed almost simultaneously, almost at the same accelerated rate for a period of from 1910 to about mid-1920s, but had completely different histories and developments. And then we also, based on a number of factors, which I'll go into as I talk about buildings, determined whether property in the proposed district would be key contributing, or non-contributing resources. And we determined at this writing, I'm always kind of tweaking it, the Wheeler Street neighborhood has 18 key contributing resources, 59 contributing resources, and 20 non-contributing resources, where Oakcroft had 12 key contributing resources, 90 contributing resources, and 11 non-contributing resources. So the Wheeler Street, in terms of its history and development, really focused on Tony's Brook with regard to how the area west of Bloomfield Avenue developed. Tony's Brook was not the greatest historically for manufacturing because of the flow of the water, but one of the cranes did develop a mill down at the bottom, at the south end of what is now Glenfield Park. And then the last manufacturer to be there was J.G. Wheeler and Company, who manufactured straw board, and that factory was closed in 1887. Wheeler and a number of his associates actually owned property in the area, and so by soon after the closing, the 1896, the Maple Avenue School, which is now Glenfield Middle School, was constructed. The township developed what was Maple Avenue Park in the former, on the former J.G. Wheeler site, which then became Glenfield Park when Essex County took over the park. And then by 1906, the survey area, which includes, if I can do this properly, Woodland Avenue to the south, Willowbrook Avenue to the, Woodland Avenue to the east, Willowbrook Avenue to the south, Lincoln to the north, and Maple to the, I'm getting this all wrong, to the west, and then Maple to the east, to the north. The Lincoln Street and Maple Avenue had already started to be developed by 1900, but it wasn't until 1910 that we begin to see properties on within the district area on Willowdale. There were some properties on the south side of Willowdale Avenue, but our survey area is on the north side, Wheeler Street and Monroe Place, which cuts between Willowdale and Maple at the top of Wheeler Street. And then, so we first see the first two family residents coming up in 1910, and then by 1912 we see the first apartment buildings being constructed. And actually the first one was, from what I can tell, was actually the Luciano building here on the cover. And this building actually even had a little grocery on the ground floor until about 1950. So the history determined that the area was primarily developed by actually Italian immigrants. They were the primary property owners and builders. They're the ones that actually applied for the building permits that I could tell, and also dealt directly with the town when they wanted their street paved and sewered by 1920. Luciano building, a couple of the other apartment buildings were also Italian owned, and then there was a mix of Italian immigrants and African Americans who from the census were migrating from the south. So we saw a lot of individuals and families who had moved from Virginia, Maryland, and the Carolinas up to Montclair. Of course, it doesn't say when an internal migration happened. There's a lot of information in the census, though, when the Italian immigrants came to America. So the census data was really quite interesting in terms of being able to kind of put buildings with certain people and how everybody lived and how everybody kind of moved around. We only did a smattering of that just to get a sense of how the area developed and who was there. And you'll see one of my recommendations will be to actually dive into that a little bit more with regard from building to building if we do a National Register nomination. So the key thing about the Wheeler Street was not only the immigration patterns, but also the type of buildings that were being used to accommodate a growing working class in this area of Montclair. The two-family residences were primarily a stacked plan, meaning that was one floor plan on top of the other that were almost identical to one another, other than where the stair was located or the front entrance, using a kind of a row-like manner with a sort of a decorative facade and a plain side elevations. And then the apartment buildings got away from the tenement buildings that you saw later in the 19th century and in the early 20th century, where there were nice apartment buildings with regard to their own private bathrooms and bedrooms and multiple bedrooms and kitchens and things like that off a stacked plan. So again, kind of taking one plan and then stacking it one on top of the other, 2-story to 3-story, not much more than that, pretty low rise, other than the Luciano building is like probably one of the biggest ones in the district. And then they too also use sort of the very classical detailing and also craftsman style influences in the architecture, primarily on the front facade. Really, Wheeler Street is a facade type of development. So this is actually the map of the survey area. We're sort of jumping the gun a little bit, but it kind of shows you where the non-contributing, which is the hatch with the cross markings, buildings, which is a combination of either buildings that, there's empty properties, number one, buildings that were constructed outside the period of significance, or ones that were constructed and have been so thoroughly modified that I can no longer tell what their original building looked like. So, like I said previously, there's 20 non-contributing resources out of 97 that were surveyed. And they are kind of scattered around, so it's a pretty tight edge in terms of a district going forward. Boundary, a tight boundary. So, like I said previously, along Lincoln Street and Maple Avenue, we had seen development prior to 1910. This is actually sort of a sample of one of the properties that was built. It was built circa 1897. It's a traditional American four-square. It's actually in excellent condition. It does have a sort of a mid-1970s application of it's almost like an asbestos siding, but I didn't think it detracted from the detailing that was utilized in the articulation of the dormers and the roof and the windows and the porch to make it key contributing, and also due to its age. This is also pre-1910 development, so 1900 Queen Anne in fantastic condition in terms of its original materials are in place. Its detailing, I could barely detect what were additions and what were not. The one thing I did find in the Wheeler Street neighborhood was 2 predominant architectural changes. One was very few original windows are intact. Most have been replaced at both the 2-family residences as well as the apartment buildings. And then there's a fair amount of new siding applied over existing siding. And it really is an application over earlier rather than a wholesale replacement of the original. There are a few examples where there is wholesale replacement, and I consider those non-contributing. So this is actually 29 Wheeler Street. It's one of the first properties built on Wheeler. It does have some changes to its siding, but I deemed it contributing since it kind of kept its sort of its form, its relationship to its neighbors, its fenestration pattern, and details like that. And that was one of the criteria, particularly in the Wheeler Street area, was for maintaining its fenestration pattern, maintaining its relationship with its neighbors, keeping that sort of row appearance along the front porch. Those were key elements for determining their status as contributing or non-contributing. But you can see, not actually in any of these particular ones, but this is clearly a stacked plan. If you look down the sides elevations, a lot of them have, like, you could tell where the dining room is because they've got the high stained glass window, with two side windows next to it. A lot of detail actually in the side elevations if you look pretty closely. So this is 111 Maple Street, again, one of the earlier properties constructed, and actually this is the only one so far, and like I said, I only dipped my toe into the census research, but this actually was, it looks like it was built by an African American man. His name was, I think it was Cliff Summers. He was a slate roofer. He actually lived previously on a little street called Chestnut, which is no longer there, near Pine Street. And he moved and built this house. He was one of the first residents in the Wheeler Street area. And it's interesting, Pasquale Ucci was his neighbor, and he also built a property at 109 Maple about the same year. So another aspect I'd like to see is kind of seeing where people ended up. Mr. Ucci ended up in Cedar Knolls eventually. Unfortunately, Mr. Summers passed away by the time, I think it was the 1930 or 40 census. So. Other elements were the apartment buildings, really a very systematic approach, really beautiful detailing on a number of them with regard to the lintel details and carrying the fenestration pattern and the cornice, right? So nice, elaborate, beautiful, detailed cornices, most of them actually in a painted metal. And then you've got some smaller buildings of this type, also apartments. This is actually less apartment and more social services area building. This started out as like a social club, part apartments, and it's today still the Women's Community Circle Center or something like that. Again, more apartment buildings. This in Willowdale at 1914, and then 1924. This is actually probably one of my favorite buildings. It's got this really beautiful sort of bluish purple brick kind of interspersed with the red brick, and again, all the windows have been replaced for the most part, unless they're kind of an odd window like you see here, and you kind of walk into the front area. There's a vestibule with the mailboxes, and then another entrance further in, and then again a center hall or a side hall with stacked plans. And then actually each neighborhood seems to have one sort of interesting person. I mean, there's probably a lot more interesting people, but ones that we know of. So this was actually the home of Aubrey Lewis, who was actually a very famous sports person in Montclair when he was in high school, but then also he played for Notre Dame during some of its more successful years, and then he was an early recruit to the FBI. And so he lived here with his parents. In 1940 census, he was 5 years old. I was able to find his parents at 34 Willowdale, but this actually was 34 Willowdale at some point. And they were only a year married in 1930, so they had 4 children by the time 1940 came. 1930, they were a year married. By the time 1940 came, they had 4 children, and his father was a pipe fitter. And they came from Virginia, so they were actually another migrants from the South. So this is their census record. So Oakcroft, little different history, same kind of influences in that Montclair needed housing, and somebody came back and decided to build housing. This was more on a grand scale, where Wheeler was on a building-by-building scale. The greatest impetus for Montclair's development, and particularly Upper Montclair by the late 19th century, was the railroad. Anderson Park, which is actually located right next to the Upper Montclair Railroad Station, was apparently one of the driving forces for Aaron Godfrey, who was, from what I could tell, a dabbler of many industries and professions before settling on real estate development. And so he brought forth the vision for Oakcroft in what was really a drainage pit for a drainage area for Second River, coming off the mountains. So he maneuvered the landscape. You can actually see how he did that on Brookfield with the stream that's visible on that street. And then he had a plan, 1910. He'd already started building before that, but for 100 homes for the Godfrey Land and Building Company. A number of houses, I think there were 6 in total, that were featured in the American Homes and Gardens magazine. They were all built by the architectural firm Freeman and Hasselman out of New York. And by 1916, he looks like he had built about 47 homes, but there was also other development, and a lot of developer builders continued to construct in the 1920s and the 1930s. Before Godfrey came, there was some development on North Mountain Avenue and on Brookfield Road. Many of those houses are still there and were considered in the survey area. They may have been something that attracted Godfrey because the houses were really quite extraordinary, the ones that were there when he showed up. So, but that was an interesting development in that the use of how do I put this? Architecturally, the houses in Godfrey's development in Oakcroft were really quite extraordinary in their use of the stucco materials and the craftsman influences with the little details and the Tudor revival, and the American Homes and Gardens magazine talks about this, how they kind of used a standard plan and then modified it as they went to make every building unique. And you can see that as you go from house to house and block to block in the architecture. And the same follows for even some of the ones in the sort of the mid-1900s in the colonial revival, where you can see sisters to a number of houses, and then you see where they tweaked some of the details. And that actually really helped with regard to chronology construction, because some things looked kind of completely out of place, and then you saw the neighbor and you go, oh, well, that makes sense. So that was helpful. So for Oakcroft, the boundaries are Parkside, which Godfrey worked with, I believe, the county and the architects on the orientation of the few houses that actually are on Parkside and that look out onto the park, and also how some of the paths were oriented to align with the intermediate roads of Princeton and Edgemont. The west boundary is North Mountain Avenue. The south boundary is Brookfield, only on the north side of the street, and then we have Oakcroft, and then Godfrey kind of cuts between the two. In terms of contributing versus non-contributing resources, there are definitely less non-contributing resources by proportion in this area. There's a high level of integrity in the architecture, very few changes to the buildings. Replacement windows are a factor. You see them often. You also see the really good quality fiberglass windows, so sometimes it's actually hard to tell which windows have been replaced and which haven't. The kind of sort of the area that received the most change or had sort of the properties constructed outside the period of significance, which were ending at 1946, which is when the corner of Parkside and North Mountain Avenue was developed. That building in particular, even though it's executed in a more modern style, really picked up the architectural influences of the stucco earlier craftsmen and interpreted it into the modern style and kind of and filled that little gap that was up there. So that brought the period of significance to that time. These area here has either buildings have been added on to significantly or they were constructed outside of that period of significance. But as you can see by the hatching, there really is a holistic approach architecturally to this district. So this is one of the properties that was constructed prior to Oakcroft's development, 65 Brookfield Road, which I know the owner. This is a really good example of the shingle style. Just very few changes were made to the building. I mean, it was a wood shingle roof, but the roof is a prominent feature. They added a garage, and it took me a couple times actually to even notice it, so that was really well done under the porte cochere. It's a really well-maintained building. The use of the stone at the base is just exquisite. So there's a number of these properties that were constructed before Oakcroft got involved, which, like I said, could have been his influence to kind of get into that area since there was already a fair amount of decent housing stock in the area, and then the Anderson Park being the probably the more attractive feature, and the railroad, since you could walk to it. This is another property. This is 305 North Mountain Avenue. It's a Queen Anne, again, high integrity. I want to say the windows were replaced here at the 1/1s, but as you can see, the porch is well executed in how it's enclosed, the detailing, the corner boards, the narrow clapboard siding, how they alternated the windows with the shutters, just to give it a more variety and to really pump out that turret. So there's a couple examples. Like I said, there were 6 houses where the properties were featured in the American Homes and Gardens. This is one of them. This was Mr. Lemkow's house at 124 Edgemont. And as you can see from the image, not much has changed other than the enclosing of some of the porch windows, which was really a common change to the building. And sometimes you wonder if that was actually kind of something that came in and out. I don't know. When you can't go up and feel the thing, it's, you're sometimes guessing. But you can see the detailing under how they overhang the second floor, and then there's the brackets and the brackets at the top, and just sort of a lot of details. And you can see all that in here, and you can still see it here. I actually did consider this one a key contributing resource given its level of architectural integrity, and as being one of the first buildings constructed in Oakcroft as part of the residential development. And then this is 19 Princeton Place, which you can still see the essence of the original building, the dormers, the chimney, the fenestration in a regular pattern, the relationship of the building and the porch, and how the porch is detailed, the 3 windows in the side. But this building does have a significant addition on it. It took me a while to figure out that was addition, so it was a well-done addition. But as a result of the addition, this actually has a contributing classification to it rather than a key contributing. Well executed. I mean, this addition, if this building was in a historic district, you guys would have passed it. Let's put it that way. So, and there's a lot of that, to be honest. There was a lot of really well executed changes to the buildings. I this building is quite interesting in the use of how they turn the roof. It really takes the craftsman and with the Tudor revival and just makes a really beautiful composition. I was amazingly, Google Earth was here in 2013. A lot has happened since 2013, and the thing that happened here is these windows are all new. They match what was there, but what they did was they actually applied the trim to the window trim that was there. So the window trim originally was the half timbering. So there's another layer on top of it. Now, I've still made this a contributing resource, but sort of those little details, it can make a difference, you know, but it's still a beautiful composition on how that building is executed, including its two neighbors. It was hard to pick a picture, actually. In addition to the craftsman style, the colonial revival is well represented in the district. This happens to be honest, one of my favorite colonial revival houses in the district. It is on a prominent. It does fit. It's on 16 Park Street, so it's Parkside, so it faces Anderson Park. But it is a really well executed a colonial revival in terms of the influences of the early Georgian colonial. How low to the ground it is, the proportions of the columns, and then sort of you've got the modern twists of the bay window projections, which you would not have in a colonial. So it's sort of, it really takes the original essence of what you would see and adds it to that modern, those modern needs, which is, you know, how architecture probably should work. And then there's an addition at the back that you can actually barely see from the facade and picks up some of the details of the front and all that kind of stuff. So, but there's again a number of examples of really good, well-executed colonial revival buildings, and then also some really well-executed additions. There's some really horrible additions too, but they're very rare. So Oakcroft's famous person is Buzz Aldrin. I think most people actually know that. He lived at 25 Princeton Place. You can see his census records in 1940. So Aubrey Lewis was 5 and Buzz was 10. So they never saw each other in high school. Too bad. Actually, Buzz Aldrin's father was a aerospace engineer, so it makes sense where he ended up as an astronaut. And so, like I said, the census records, I did not dive too much into the census records in Oakcroft. Oakcroft really worked more for its architecture, where Wheeler is both architecture and its social history and the relationship of immigration and migration and how that area developed. And let me just go into the recommendations then, because that talks about some of that. So the Wheeler Street neighborhood, I am recommending that you make it, consider it for a local historic district with a period of significance of 1910 to circa 1930, which is the year of initial development when you first see some of the two-family houses in the area, geared specifically for working class families, followed soon thereafter by the apartment buildings, through the end of the prolific construction, which was due, circa 1929, circa 1930, to the Great Depression. You see a complete drop-off. The area is developed as much as it's going to by the 1933 maps. And then you're now actually seeing more development now in the last 5 years in Wheeler than you probably have seen in the last 30 years. I believe the district is significant under Criterion A for the development to provide multifamily housing for working class families, specifically the two-family and the mid-size apartment buildings, in response to the rapid growth in Montclair, due to advances in transportation, but also due to increased immigration and migration of African American families from the south, as well as, in addition to European immigration, you saw a little bit of immigration from Barbados and the islands. The census is not as clear as to where they're coming from what islands they're coming from, but that's the general area.
And I just had a quick question.
Sure.
Just a point of clarification. The criterion that you're referring to, is that consistent with the designation criteria set forth in the Montclair Historic Preservation
Yeah,
Ordinance?
it's item
Okay.
5 or 6 in your, you do
Okay.
kind of follow that
But it's
pretty well.
consistent
Yes,
with our-
yep,
okay.
Yep. And then, well, I did this because it's going to relate to the other, yep. And then significance under criterion C, which for its architecture, and the use of the popular architectural styles like Craftsman, Colonial Revival, and Queen Anne in the two-family residences and the apartment buildings, sort of taking those elements that you see in single-family residences and applying them in a row style to these architectural models. And then the articulation of the stack plan to provide the affordable housing. I mean, I think that's a really important part in terms of, there's a lot of articulation of the plan in Oakcroft, which would make those houses much more expensive. You can actually see that where the houses in Oakcroft, when they applied for the building permits, they were in the $7,000 range. The ones in on Wheeler were $2,300. So you're talking half the price and providing two houses for one, two houses in one at that price. So that's an important distinction. But then also, like I said, attractive, right? They're not attractive, and there's some really good examples that are well articulated that still remain. And then I am actually recommending consideration for designation for the New Jersey and National Registers for the same criteria above, but I think it would be a stronger nomination if we looked at a broader geographic area to include more Maple Avenue, and then also to include the park and the school, since the park was constructed as a residential neighborhood park that caters to the neighborhood that you're talking about, like that you're looking at, as well as Tony's Brooks history with regard to the neighborhood. And the school, because the children who lived in the area went to the school before the schools were integrated. And then Maple Avenue, because Maple Avenue right now in the area of the district, which is only the south side that we looked at, has a mix of two-family residences, apartments, as well as commercial buildings. And the commercial buildings kind of don't fit in with the broader theme of the Wheeler Street neighborhood survey area. But if you look farther down Maple Avenue towards Bloomfield Avenue, you get more commercial buildings, and it all turns out that a lot of them were garages, like mechanics, so that might be a theme. And then when you go further north, you pick up more single-family residences, which then would tie better in with Lincoln Street. In the discussions in the report, Lincoln Street does not really fit right now with the rest of the neighborhood because it's predominantly single-family. It is a mix of in the area, in the POS, but before the POS, which is fine because it still existed after, during the period of significance. But by bringing more of Maple Avenue in, there'd be better justification for the boundary of Lincoln Street in a national or New Jersey and National Register designation. And those are two completely different tracks, and they have different ramifications in terms of what it means to the homeowner, but those are the recommendations. And then the Oakcroft, the period of significance we're recommending is 1906, which is when sort of the Godfrey started getting involved. It does not does not take away from the buildings that were already there because they remain during the period of significance, but sort of this is a very clear-cut starting point with regard to time, and then also sort of it goes to the point where we have the area filled out with that final single-family residence. There was a few, I want to say, on Brookfield that are after 1946. but only, I want to say 2 or 3. I am recommending, again, significance under criterion A, which is sort of social and cultural and influences on how Montclair developed. This is primarily related to the railroad, the trolley, the automobile. And Godfrey, when he, in his advertisements, geared, when he was advertising in the Montclair Times, he emphasized the value of the trolley. When he was advertising in the New York Times, he emphasized the value of the railroad. So clearly knew who his audience was. And then significance under criterion C for its architecture, the articulation of his visions, at least in part, in the early 20th century, to actually respond to housing needs for the upper and upper middle class, as well as the really great use of the popular styles of the period, some designed by architects, others designed by developer builders, and the fact that they retain a high degree of architectural integrity. I am also, so I'm recommending that it be a local district. I am recommending that it also be considered possibly for New Jersey and National Register designation, possibly incorporating the history of the development of Anderson Park. I don't really know how that kind of work, because that's already on the register. One of the things I did find was I wondered why Godfrey stopped developing in 1916 and moved on to other areas. So I think that is an area of research that should be looked more closely at, in terms of looking at some of his other later development to see whether he learned lessons here in Oakcroft, which caused him to leave, or whether he lost money, or he just felt his time was out. You may or may not be able to find that looking at how his other developments were done. He had a lot of competition. When you look at the newspaper advertisements, there was a lot of development going on. So that would be an interesting take, at least in developing the New Jersey National Register nomination. That's it.
Oh.
Sorry.
Thank you,
those are my
Margaret.
recommendations. I mean, I know there's a lot of information, and every building has an architectural description. Every building, we try to date when it was constructed, and we also state what we think the changes were, and then we designate whether it's contributing or non-contributing and why. There's a database that we produced. It's right now with the state of New Jersey being reviewed. Once I get their comments back, we'll finish that and give it, do print final copies and give it to you guys. So this way, it's a searchable database for your as a resource for you guys.
Oh, thank you. Yes, a lot of work. Thanks a lot. So while we're sitting here, do my colleagues have any questions of Margaret in terms of her study and the way she put together the documentation, or just geared towards what she's done here?
When we get it, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that the differences between the two neighborhoods at the same time. Who was moving in there, how they were moving in there, maybe where they were coming from, and how that resulted in the different types of architecture, and how places are bigger in one place and smaller in another. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I thought so too. I mean, I really came into this knowing nothing about either place, and to look at them side by side. I mean, they're two completely different areas of town, but at the same time period. Not to generalize, but the people who lived in the Wheeler Street area were working for the people who lived in the Upper Montclair area. They were building their houses, they were cleaning their houses for at least a time period until 1929, when you definitely see a separation, and people, those who were living in the Wheeler Street area, joined the military by a lot. We've got a war, right? But later in the 30s, and doing mechanic work, doing more road work, that kind of stuff, less domestic labor by the time you get to the 1940s.
Well, it was the rise of the automobile, too.
Yes,
Really,
yeah, absolutely. And you can absolutely see that on Maple Street with regard to the amount of garages that are built. The first one that we see in this area is 1911. Yeah, so I didn't even think about that. I'm going to add that to the thing.
Any other?
So when we look at this is looking at it as neighborhoods, not as individual architectural elements within the neighborhood. We don't take it, the study doesn't get into each house, each.
Oh, do you do a description of each house?
So there's an architectural description of each house, but it's only from the front and the visible side.
What you can see.
What you can see from the street.
What I can see from the
What you
street.
could research or somehow.
And the couple elements of research that I did was I did newspaper research in terms of building building permits. Actually, Montclair Times published all the building permits, or most of them. They never got the addresses right, but I found some articles about the paving on Wheeler, and I think it was 20 residents petitioned Essex County to have their street paved and sewered and all that kind of stuff. Newspaper research, as well as for Oakcroft, research on some of the architects that were involved in Oakcroft. The census research and the city directories were really a big key component to figure out when things were dated, and then I could take the city directory information and go do the census research, so to tie the people together. And then see who their neighbors were. So you pick a few, and then you kind of look to see who all the neighbors are and what they're doing, and who lives with them, and how they move, and all that kind of stuff.
Any other comments?
So will this report become the designation report for once that we actually vote on and designate, or is there more fleshing out to be done and more details to be filled in?
So I think for local, so one of the things is right now this designation report is the two combined, like Wheeler, Oakcroft, Wheeler, Oakcroft, Wheeler, Oakcroft. What we discussed was I'm going to actually do Wheeler, Oakcroft, right, to make it easier for everybody to read. If you give me a designation report, I can add some elements in there to make it that for you locally. The New Jersey National Register, that's a completely different. It's a different animal. The great base information, but you do need to do more research, and then you could take the architectural descriptions from the survey and actually put them in section 7 of the significance report typically.
Yeah, that wouldn't be part of this, what we're doing.
But I can definitely make this, if you give me a
Yeah,
sample
but
of what
essentially
you
the
want.
work that's been completed to date is the bones of the nomination report.
But you said the bones, so there's more.
It's really
to
just,
flesh it out.
well, I guess.
Maybe just changing
Bones is not the right word.
the.
The meat is all here, just not arranged in the appropriate
I see.
format as Ms. Hickey
I got it,
explained.
I got it.
So, just some rearranging of the document, and then we can move forward with this.
Yeah.
But what you just described, that will be ready for us to read by the November 12th
Yes.
community meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, and that will be what will be up on the website?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I gave Graham something preliminary right now. It's got most of it in there. I've actually, as I was doing this, I added more information.
Right. Right.
But, yeah, so that will be by the 12th, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and this draft that the commission has tonight is also posted publicly now, linked from tonight's agenda. So we'll carry this forward and post it in the interim, as well as a copy of Ms. Hickey's presentation on this page for residents to get the info that's out there already. Then once the separate reports are finalized, then I'll replace those. So we have the two reports available.
And the other thing I would suggest, Graham, to put on the website is our zoning laws that, and our, the 347-135, how people can access that to see what the process is.
Yeah, so the page that I'm crafting is going to have an explanation of the designation process, and then
Right.
what does designation mean, and then that's going to explain that process as well. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. Does anyone here from the public would like to ask a question of Ms. Hickey? And if you keep your comments to the documentation that she's done now and the study that she's shown us now, more comments will be readily answered at our next meeting on November 12th? No? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
And our last order of business is the certificate for HP application 2019-29, 16 Portland Place, LLC. So I've lost my copy of that. Has everyone read that?
Well, it's just Ms. Bennett and Mr. Rooney again are the only eligible.
Oh, that's right.
members on this one, so.
So we get to vote on it. All right, you go first. I think that's, yes.
So, move to approve.
I second. All in favor? Aye.
And the two
Okay.
abstentions. Okay.
So, let the record show it's 10:25. We're ready to, oh, no, we're not ready to adjourn. Mr. Petto has to confirm our date, our
Yes.
meeting date for December.
Right. So since there's at least 4 of you here. So currently, the commission is scheduled to meet on December 19th, which is the Thursday before the last holiday weekend. Given that the commission is planning to hold the public hearing for these nominations that we just discussed, the public hearing, just to kind of get back into the nomination process, the commission is required to provide certified mail notice to all property owners within these districts, and then to announce the public hearing that we'll hold, which will be at a commission meeting. Yes. So the initial thought by the Landmark Nomination Committee that was December 19th is a little close to the holiday week. If we could slide our December meeting up a week, that would help the residents, kind of provide them more opportunity to attend the public hearing meeting a little bit further away from the holiday, which would be coming up. So there was a thought to look at, I think the dates that I emailed to everyone was the 9th, 10th, or the 12th of December as possible dates. So if there's any thoughts on that as far as availability goes.
Either the 9th or the 10th for me. I can't do the 12th. You had a preference, right?
I had a preference for Thursday, but...
Oh, that's the 12th. I can't do it.
But if no one else can do it, I can add something.
And will you be here?
I'm totally okay.
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 So maybe December 10th if we...
Okay.
Is that a Tuesday?
So I'll take a look at December 10th, and
Okay.
and we'll confirm that date. We'll have to do full public notice on that. And again, as I said, the residents will receive a certified mail letter.
Council
regarding
meetings
that.
on the 3rd and the 17th.
Yes, yeah, I avoided that. That's why I selected that week, so.
You said you were going to put together something that says what does it mean to be designated? Is that
As
you?
far as what the certificate of appropriateness process essentially implies and entails.
And have we thought about putting together some rules that would streamline it a bit, so not every little change would have to come for a certificate of appropriateness?
We have not yet thought about that at this time. That would require an ordinance change, but that is maybe something that we could discuss parallel to this process.
I
and
think it's important,
So-
with these 200 and however many property owners, they're going to
211.
be
Mhm.
concerned
Mhm.
about, every change will have to come before this board once a month, and that's...
And I think that that's something that perhaps a subcommittee of the commission could discuss in the interim while we do this. So, I think we can discuss that with the chair and see if we can set up a subcommittee to take a look at the existing regulations and see if we want to craft something that's specific for residential properties as opposed to the broad regulations which are in place for our commercial districts at this time. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, very good.
So just to be clear, the community meeting on November 12th would be advertised how? On the website?
Yeah, so we're going to do a press release, advertise on the website. I'll probably also just do public notice in the newspaper just in case 4 of you come. Because if 4 of you do come, then it is technically a public meeting, so I'll notice that as well.
You mean a regular meeting of the commission?
No, this
no.
is
Hearing for this.
it's not a hearing
No.
for this. We're holding just a community
Public
meeting.
It's an informational meeting.
I think there's enough information out there with this report. In other words, it's pretty short time.
Before November 12th, you're talking about?
pretty short time span
Between now and then.
you mean to do,
Well, the purpose of the November 12th meeting is not the formal public hearing.
Right.
That's
Well, I
going to be in
understand
December.
that. I just
This
meant,
is really
there-
just to,
Does the public have enough meat to chew on, to get to use that, before they come to the meeting? I think they may. I'm not saying
they
it's
do.
not. I just want to make sure that there's, the public has an opportunity to see these reports, and if they're going to be separated. I don't know, just.
what do you mean separated?
We're going to do a Wheeler report, none of the.
as
No,
far,
it's good.
yeah.
Oh, I see what you,
He's,
yeah.
he's referencing as far as reformatting and getting the materials out there for the public consumption, so.
I mean, there's no legal requirement, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, the community meeting that we're doing is a little bit of above and beyond to kind of do
Right,
some
it's
additional outreach,
informational.
so.
It's informational for the public, and I'm just, if there's any other way that you think we could get the information to the public beforehand.
Well, then that's why I think we're going to couple
Press
it with our,
release.
we're going to work with the communication staff here
Right.
at the township to do this press release and, get things out to local media about the community meeting on the 12th, and coupling that with our web presence and putting all the materials online for folks to read and download in advance of the meeting. And really, the meeting is just to discuss and present what's happening, and then advise about the public hearing, which will be in December.
This is 19 days.
And that
Yeah,
has
we
to
were
go
just
out,
concerned about any later in November, we start bumping into
Yeah.
November, the
And we
holidays and the.
have to get this done before the end of the year? Is that like a requirement that it?
It's technically not. Looking forward through the designation process, how this works is the commission will make their final recommendation in December at the meeting. Then the designation goes forward to the council. The council then will refer it to the planning board for advice, because this is technically a zone change, is planning and zoning impact. The planning board will then send their report back to the council, and then the council has the ultimate decision regarding designation status.
so it's a few more months.
So it's a long process in full, so the sooner that we can wrap things
But
up
there's
on our
nothing
end, we
about
can
like
start that.
the funding, the grant.
No,
that
in fact,
compels us to get it
the
done.
funding period is closed out with Ms. Hickey, so she's
I'm still waiting.
she's still with us, but as these
better
are
be here on
federal
November
funds,
12th.
it was on federal fiscal year, so it actually closed September 30th. so.
Okay.
I remember in the Pleasant Street House, the council had an awful lot of people coming in and commenting, protesting, et cetera, which is what knocked one of those out.
Right.
Out of the ballpark. So, I don't know how people feel about these, but that's a place
Well,
where there's a lot of
positively.
Well, we should be prepared either way.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why I think it's really important to put together
Yes.
some other,
Sure.
alternative.
Absolutely.
Okay, so any other, all right, so we're having the informational meeting November 12th. After, what date will you send out the letters to the public about the?
So that's required to be sent 20 days prior to the now December 10th meeting. So
Right.
that would be, I don't know, the end of November, November 20th, I guess.
November 20th.
Yeah.
Okay, as long
30
as
days
we.
in November, yes.
Yes.
When do you have to file that form?
So that, I need to look exactly at the code.
Here, I
don't-
have it.
I don't know exactly off the top of my head.
Here, just pass that down.
I mean, people have to understand it doesn't protect their neighborhood, it doesn't really give them big hassles when they want to do things.
Yeah, so the protest against a landmark, this is 347, 135B5, a protest against landmark designation signed by the owners of record of 30% or more of the properties within a proposed district may be filed with the commission 10 days prior to the scheduled hearing, so that would be December 1st, technically it would have to be.
What does that do?
It doesn't, the protest must be in writing, must contain the reasons for the protest, and must bear the verified signatures of the owners joining in such protest. I think that the protest report just accompanies the commission's correspondence to the council. Yeah.
All right, well, all this information will be on the website
Yes.
as well. Is on the website.
Mhm.
Will be on the website.
Will be.
Well,
Okay.
the code is always on.
It's-
The code
yes.
is always on the website, but
But
I'll
it's,
extract
sometimes
this
it's
relevant
difficult
section.
to navigate that. And,
You have to go pretty far to find that.
exactly. Okay, well, if there's no other business, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.